I am thrilled to welcome you to the second annual APAICS Tech Summit. I'm Madeline Milka, President and CEO of APAICS, the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. I'd like to thank Amazon, our presenting sponsor, as well as all of our panelists and moderators and partners. Your support enables APAICS to fulfill its mission of promoting Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander participation and representation at all levels of the political process, from community service to elected office. The Tech Summit brings together community and corporate leaders, subject matter experts, as well as Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander elected officials for bipartisan policy discussions that affect our communities and the nation at large. Over the next 2 days, we'll hear discussions on AA and NHPI representation at all levels in the tech industry, challenges and opportunities in addressing the digital divide, preventing online harassment and misinformation, and digital skilling initiatives to increase technical literacy in underserved communities. First, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Meredith Atwell-Baker. Meredith joined CTIA as its president and CEO in June of 2014. She brings extensive experience on spectrum issues and wireless policy, and a keen understanding of how government and business must work together to drive innovation. Prior to joining CTIA, Meredith served as the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at Comcast NBC Universal. In 2009, she was appointed by President Barack Obama to serve as a commissioner to the Federal Communications Commission. Prior to joining the FCC, Meredith served in the Bush administration as the Acting Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Communications and Information, as well as the Acting Administrator of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. Let's welcome Meredith to the APAICS Tech Summit.
Hello, I'm Meredith Baker of CTIA. I want to thank Madeline and everyone with APAICS for your critical work. As the wireless industry, we support your mission and your goals, and are proud to partner with you. The wireless industry recognizes its responsibility to ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion within its companies, as well as equitable access and opportunity for those it serves. It is the access point I want to touch on briefly, because I'm so excited about what 5G wireless can do to create the opportunities we will all need to get ahead. Thanks to billions and billions invested, 5G is now helping us meet today's challenges, especially closing the digital divide. Too many Americans do not have access to affordable, high-speed broadband at home. We all saw the challenges during the pandemic and have come together to address it. The new capabilities of 5G are allowing wireless to be your home broadband solution for the first time. We are able to reach underserved and unserved areas. And the fastest growing broadband provider today is actually a wireless company. 5G Home is already available in 70 million households, and in just a few years, it will be an option for hundreds of millions more. And we're just at the beginning of the 5G decade that will create over 4 million new jobs across our country. We are already seeing those jobs take shape. I recently met Kai, a Virginia teacher who was inspired by the cuts in their field trip budget at her school to innovate. Now she's an entrepreneur using 5G to transform the classroom and bring the world of virtual learning to every child in every community. Thank you for all you do. I look forward to building our 5G future together.
Thank you, Meredith, for your remarks. Our first panel at the Tech Summit is Enabling Opportunities, 5G and Communities of Color. This panel will explore the potential of 5G and how we can ensure that communities of color are not left behind. It's my pleasure to introduce the panel moderator, John Nakahara. John is chair of HWG, a prominent Washington, D.C. law firm, and is widely regarded as one of the leading telecom lawyers in the United States. He provides strategic regulatory advice to large and small telecommunications, internet, hardware, software, terrestrial wireless companies, and cable companies. Let's give a warm welcome to John as he introduces our panelists.
Thanks, Madeline. It's a pleasure to join APAICS for this year's 2022 Tech Summit and for this panel on 5G, how technology affects social change. This is a great time for this panel. We hear a lot about 5G these days. It's a major feature in all the ads we get from our wireless phone providers. It's a critical technology, not just in the US, but globally. And it's of strategic importance in the race with global competitors such as China. But what actually is 5G? What does it promise? And how can it be a tool or platform to help empower our AANHPI communities, both in our daily lives and businesses and politically? We have a great panel to help give us insight into these questions. Starting in alphabetical order, we have Pierluca Chiodelli, who's currently Vice President of Engineering, Technology, and Edge Portfolio Product Manager and Customer Operations at Dell Technologies. Pierluca's organization is responsible for Edge Enterprise Dell Technologies roadmap and vision and strategic technical partners engagement across Dell Technologies. Next, we have Beth Fujimoto, Assistant Vice President, Public Policy for AT&T. Beth is responsible for AT&T's state and federal policy development on 21st century universal service issues, including broadband availability, government broadband funds, helping people who have low incomes to afford broadband, and how these programs are funded. Lastly, we have Jefferson Wang, who leads Accenture's new global 5G and networks practice, uniting 8,000 plus network resources under a common vision that modern network connectivity is a new competitive differentiator that will improve lives. Accenture's practice helps communication service providers and enterprises with industry-specific network solutions from plan and design through build and run. So now to get started with our panel. To start, Jeff, could you give an overview of what 5G is? Is it just faster browsing from our tablets and smartphones, or is it something else? Why do people talk about 5G as transformational?
Yeah, absolutely, John. I think when you kind of look back at history in wireless technology, you kind of see there's the 1G days where you unlocked mobile voice. In 2G, you added text messaging where you had to mash the 2 key 3 times just to get the letter C out there. And then in the 3G days, you unlocked mobile data. And in 4G, there was really mobile internet. But a commonality across all of those previous generations was about the consumer. And in 5G, it was built from the ground up, brand new device vision, brand new radio technology, new need for backhaul, an entirely new core network. So it was really, and also new spectrum that was going to be engaged. So it's really this entirely built from the ground up to serve the consumer and the enterprise. And that's why you really look at this as really being a transformational technology where you actually are trying to actually help the enterprises transform through wireless technologies, as well as help consumers with what you mentioned at the beginning around faster browsing speed, more responsive websites, and more devices connected.
Thanks, Jeff. Pierluca, from your perch at Dell, can you share what you see as the transformational opportunities and applications that will flow from 5G? And what does it take for 5G spawned ideas to flow from the brainstorming whiteboard to something that we can use every day?
Thank you. So from Dell perspective, I think building on what Jeff was pointed out, 5G is just more than just a new brand or new connectivity. 5G require an entire transformation and require the entire industry, including computing industry and software industry, to come together. So it's not just connectivity per se. 5G was also the movement to Open RAN, so the ability to run application for the 5G connectivity. In the past was very silos, right? In the 3G days, 4G days was like you buy that solution for a very particular vendor. With the 5G, there is a movement to also standardize this. But the most important thing is how you can make the thing real. We all understand that, you know, on the device that we have every day on the phone, 5G is a reality. Why is not a reality in every place? Because it's based on the outcome. And so if you are not based on what really transformation, you need to transform the community. You need to solve real problem. And that's where 5G can be very revolutionary. But the 5G by per se, without having a project to transform the community, to make the life better, is not going to be there soon enough. So we need to invest in that. We need to see the entire holistic picture. And that's where I think here on the panel, working all together, right? From connectivity point of view, but from an application point of view, from an outcome point of view, and helping the community to reach the next step and really bring in this also notion of a digital city or digital community. It's where 5G really will show the best, right? So it's not, 5G is different because it's not just about connectivity.
Thanks, Pierluca. Turning to you, Beth. AT&T is, of course, deploying 5G networks, and it is a major technology solutions provider to businesses of all sizes. Can you tell us what you see as major potential changes that we could see from 5G?
Sure. Much like 4G introduced the world to the gig economy and even spurred entirely new industries like ride sharing, AT&T believes that mobile 5G will jumpstart the next wave of unforeseen innovation. Pierluca talked about, what it'll mean for communities. And indeed, one of the most important changes we believe 5G and 5G-enabled technologies will help to drive is to better enable communities to address the existential threat that is climate change. 5G can help to make communities more sustainable. Just one example, AT&T and JBG Smith are creating the first true 5G smart city at scale called National Landing in Arlington, Virginia. What does a 5G smart city enable? Here are a few possibilities. Sensors in smart buildings collect data like, is a room in an office building empty, or are there maybe like 10 people in there, or 3 or 20? And what about the room down the hall or the floor above? 5G coupled with artificial intelligence or AI capabilities will enable the smart building to then automatically adjust the heating or cooling to each room. And 5G and AI can also automatically lower the blinds to keep rooms cooler on hot afternoons, but raise them to maximize natural light on cooler days. In these ways, 5G can help to more efficiently manage energy consumption. And the same goes for water usage. Smart technologies can monitor water usage in a building, for example, enabling building management to identify water leaks early, automatically shut down the water flow to where the leak is happening, and thereby help to minimize wasting the precious resource that is water. Out on the street, municipal and public safety sensors can help to manage street and pedestrian traffic, helping to make the city more walkable, and so helping to reduce our carbon emissions. 5G and 5G-enabled technologies can help all of our communities to adopt more sustainable practices.
Beth, continuing on, how does 5G differ in rural areas from urban? And how will 5G be as potentially transformational in rural areas? As we all know, those areas have generally lagged urban areas in benefiting from new digital architectures.
So today, AT&T delivers 3 flavors of 5G to our customers to give them unique experiences, faster speeds, and capacity. Our initial deployment strategy used millimeter wave spectrum, and it's called that because it's spectrum that's very high frequency and has very short wavelengths that can be measured in millimeters. We're using millimeter wave spectrum to offer 5G plus in iconic destinations and key venues where demand on our network is high and extra capacity and coverage is needed. 5G plus today is available in parts of more than 45 cities and more than 45 stadiums and venues, and we're continuing to densify that network today. Secondly, we are using C-band spectrum, or what we also call mid-band spectrum, because it sits between the other 2 bands that we have. We're using C-band spectrum to provide a great combination of fast speeds and wider geographic coverage. Earlier this year, we introduced this mid-band 5G plus in parts of 8 metropolitan areas and are expanding this coverage rapidly. Our goal is to reach 200 million customers by the end of 2023. And Third, AT&T 5G, our low-band 5G service, has been available nationwide since July of 2020. Today, we cover more than 281 million people in nearly 22,000 cities and towns across the country with AT&T 5G, which offers a better wireless experience with greater capacity to enable fast responses on 5G capable devices. Now, John asked whether 5G will be as transformational for rural areas as it will be for urban areas. The answer is a most definite and emphatic yes. Telehealth capabilities will help to connect rural families with medical professionals virtually instead of having to travel to appointments in urban and suburban areas. This can help to improve access to quality health care for people in rural areas, not to mention help to lower carbon emissions. A second ago, in the context of cities, we talked about how 5G and 5G-enabled technologies would help to drive sustainability improvements in cities. 5G will also drive sustainability improvements in rural areas. Farmers today are using 5G-enabled technologies to monitor crops and soil conditions, giving them real-time data to quickly adjust their operations and even run farming tasks remotely. This can mean producing more food using fewer resources, less water, less fertilizer, and less pesticides. 5G is also giving us connected cows. Yes, you heard me right. Connected cows. AT&T Internet of Things, or IoT as we call it for short. AT&T connectivity is being deployed to help farmers manage their dairy cows. A company called APAICS Tech is using AT&T IoT technology to enable its smart sensor technology in dairy cows. And forgive me, this is going to be a little bit of a visual image, but I need to do this to explain how it works. The cows ingest the smart sensors, which remain in the first of the cow's multiple stomachs. The smart sensors then provide ongoing data back to their farmers that help them monitor the cow's health. By providing early warning signals of potential health issues, farmers can provide medical interventions earlier, which can help to limit the use of antibiotics. The smart sensors also inform dairy farmers when a pregnant cow is about to go into labor, helping to facilitate the safe arrival of a healthy animal. So 5G and 5G-enabled technologies are already having transformative effects in rural areas, helping to make food production more sustainable and economically viable.
Thanks, Beth. Jeff, and then Pierluca, do you have additional thoughts about both the differences in capabilities of 5G in rural areas and also its potential benefits in those areas?
Absolutely. So as Beth pointed out, and I want to reconnect to my previous comment, 5G is not just 5G as a connectivity. As Beth, all the examples that they explain require certain type of compute, certain type of application. The connectivity is an element of that. What is important for rural community is things that we're doing in collaboration. For example, with AT&T, where we have a connected nation, and we support Centene Corporation K-12 for connectivity in rural area, and we're doing that together with AT&T. I want to make sure that the people that listen to us, that they are really in the policy making system, they understand that 5G require multiple people coming together. People that they are in their passion, the fact that they want to change the future for better. That's one of the core things that they'll try to do, make human progress. When we say about human progress, we mean really to progress the community. So 5G is just another thing that we can go, and if we can take that wave, we can transform how our community interact, especially if I think about the Asian community where we are very close to our elderly people. The fact that we cannot live together or we cannot live with them, and especially immigrants, that they come from different background, having in this community, especially in the rural area of the United States, an ability to connect and create a pool of people, interchange, speak the native language that they may have, the ability to listen to doctor, the ability to connect with their family, the ability to connect with the family abroad is very important. And so that's why it comes down at the end of the day with all these great examples that Beth pointed out, that the first things is need to be a need, and then need to be satisfied. So my suggestion to the policymaker is to speak with the communities, understand the needs of those communities, understand how other region in United States they address that problem, how other people around the globe. The digital city example is a great one, right? They can really transform the life of people that they are in need. Because people that the technology can do very good thing for the less fortunate people, but also for the people that they are like the elderly community or people that they searching for opportunity moving around. Technology give us this ability, and connectivity is just a boost of that. So it's very important when we go and transform a place that we transform because we want to do the better for the place. And it can be, as we discuss, the farmer to have a better quality of food, but can be also the input, can be the education. Bringing education to rural community, access to the same type of education. It's a very important thing, and they'll provide all the compute and all the ecosystem for doing that. Obviously, in conjunction with the AT&T as well. Right.
Yeah, I think one way to think about it, John, is in rural, there's a certain set of challenges, and in urban, there's another set of challenges. And how can 5G in its different forms and the community and ecosystem around it solve those? So I'll give you a couple of examples that Accenture is working on. So Accenture solves problems for clients, right? If our client is a digital divide municipality that needs to solve that in a rural area, if it's a sports stadium that is trying to monetize differently or create a better customer experience in an urban area, or even if it's an auto manufacturing company that's trying to increase productivities or increase quality based on that. Accenture works with each of those to figure out how do we actually use 5G, the ecosystem, the compute, the storage, everything we talked about to actually solve those problems. So let me give some of those examples. In a rural setting, a lot of times in many different government entities, there is this subsidy for broadband. And broadband is defined in many different ways in rural communities. It can be defined as downlink only, or it can be defined as symmetrical. And there's a lot of ways to actually get that technology there. There's satellite, there is fiber, there's hybrid with coax to the last mile. And then there's potentially 5G fixed wireless access that lowers that cost to the last mile. So if there's areas where you cannot dig the fiber trench to reach these rural communities, can we use 5G and a wireless last mile link to lower that cost to serve? And is there an ability to actually serve that community differently? If you look at the urban example, sports stadiums, for example. So Accenture is working with Marvel Sports Stadium in Australia. And a sports stadium has to think about a couple things, right? How do you consistently increase the actual customer experience? For example, you come into a certain gate and you don't know where your seat is, so you have to walk all the way around to the other side to get to your gate. You potentially want to see what the shortest line to merchandise is, or food and beverage, in order to actually get to a quicker and not miss a beat of the game. So Accenture is working with a 5G network in that sports stadium to actually do augmented reality wayfinding. So as Pierluca mentioned, what are the other ecosystem players that Accenture is pulling together? So Google's involved there, Accenture's involved there, Telstra as an operator is involved there, and the Marvel Stadium itself, where Australia Rules football is being held, is involved there. So that's how we're pulling together that ecosystem. And then in a hybrid example of rural versus urban, if you look at an auto manufacturing plant, so Stellantis is an auto manufacturing client that Accenture is working with, and we're pulling together Tim Brazil, Stellantis, and Accenture. And we're working on a 5G private network with MEC on the edge compute, with an algorithm, a video analytics algorithm that Accenture developed so that we can actually tell, Stellantis makes lots of different brands of cars and a lot of different models of cars. And you'd be surprised at how many times the wrong brand gets matched with the actual wrong model. And there's somebody dedicated to looking at that line for quality assurance. Well, how do we upskill that person or that team into another function while we actually use 5G plus the edge compute plus the video analytics solution that Accenture built out so that we can actually do that and have only one person there to do quality checks, but their computer vision is taking care of most of it, and upskilling that person to a higher value job or upskilling that person to another part of the auto manufacturing plant. So those are just some examples of how you could think about urban as well as rural impact of 5G.
Shifting a little bit here, Jeff, when we were talking prior to the panel, you indicated that Accenture had done some work to estimate the impact of 5G on the nation's economy. Can you share some of the key results?
Yeah, I think why it's so important to think about when you started this, John, around 5G being transformational, and we discussed how 5G is built from the ground up to help the consumer and the enterprise to really look at what's the economic impact, the job impact, and just societal impact, right? We've heard some really good examples in those. So one of the things we did was we worked with Qualcomm and we did an economic study specifically focused on the US and Europe to start around what's the GDP impact of 5G. And over the next 5 years, what we found is that 5G can have up to a $1.5 trillion impact to the US GDP and a $1.2 trillion impact to all of Europe's GDP. And how does that translate into potential for transforming or adding jobs? And when we looked at full-time, part-time, and seasonal jobs, and this includes deployment of 5G, this includes the transformation of jobs like we talked about, where you're upskilling that worker to just visually look at a brand plus a model of a car and moving them into a different part of the business. But if you look at the job impacts, what we found is in the US, it was up to 16 million jobs could be created or transformed over the next 5 years due to 5G. And in Europe, that number was up to about 20 million jobs that could be transformed or created due to 5G. So an incredible impact on the entire value chain, whether it's finding people who can kind of help us with the actual deployment of it, or actually working on these assembly lines, these factories, these oil and gas companies, these utilities where we're transforming those jobs. So a really, really impressive set of numbers on GDP impact and also potentially transformation.
Thanks, Jeff. Beth, turning back to you, can you help us understand where we are as a nation in our 5G deployment? What is yet to come, and what are some of the challenges that will make full 5G deployment arrive sooner or take longer? In particular, since we have a number of state and local government participants today, what can our state and local governments do to help?
Sure, thank you. The wireless industry has made remarkable progress deploying 5G, has made tens of billions of dollars of investments to bring 5G about. And that is something that is continuing as we densify and extend our networks. As a result of all of this investment in our 5G networks, according to CTIA, the Wireless Association, mobile speeds jumped by 50% in the past year. And 5G networks today now cover more than 300 million people across the United States. Now, John, you also asked what is yet to come and what challenges do we face getting there. To fully realize 5G's potential, carriers, like I said, are continuing to invest billions every year to densify their wireless networks with macro sites, which are, sort of the larger cell sites that, you might think about when you think of a cell sites, but also small cell nodes along with the necessary fiber infrastructure, all of which enables 5G. To meet the demand for mobile broadband and to continue to deploy next generation 5G networks, we need policies at all levels of government to help accelerate infrastructure deployment. Perhaps the most obvious challenge is the need to ensure that additional spectrum must continue to become available in a timely manner. Beyond spectrum, though, siting and permitting continue to be major challenges to keeping 5G deployment on track. It takes time to work through the process of acquiring sites to deploy cell sites and other network equipment, to make the appropriate engineering designs, and to secure the necessary government permits. Local facility siting regulations and practices can present obstacles to timely deployment. For example, some areas have established moratoria on new facilities. Others require unnecessary reviews in the context of adding or swapping out new facilities on existing cell site structures. And some localities continue to charge unreasonable rates for access to rights of way where cell sites are deployed. And all of this is before construction even begins. Across the industry, adding new 5G locations can take anywhere from 12 to 18 months on average. In recent years, the FCC has worked to remove regulatory barriers that inhibited deployment of the infrastructure necessary for 5G and other advanced wireless services. In the 2 years following implementation of the FCC siting reforms, more cell sites were built than the previous 7 years combined. So, obviously the FCC's actions have been very helpful in this regard. But to fully realize 5G's potential, we are going to need hundreds of thousands of small cells in the coming years. In many communities, siting processes are lengthy, complex, and costly. Efficient and timely processing of local permitting and related applications is critical to the timely deployment, not only of 5G wireless infrastructure, but also for next generation end-to-end fiber. AT&T has developed a list of local permitting best practices that municipalities can adopt to help speed both wireless as well as fiber deployments. These include practices like ensuring adequate staffing to process permitting and cable location activities, and having a single point of contact to communicate with applicants. Establishing clear permit submission requirements, using electronic systems instead of paper filings to streamline the submission of applications and supporting materials, and utilizing municipal websites to disseminate available agency contact information, forms, ordinances, and so on. Why should policymakers care about how siting and permitting can delay 5G deployment? Jeff spoke a moment ago about the potential positive impacts that 5G deployment are anticipated to have on the US and European economies and the availability of jobs. And CTIA commissioned an economic study that came to very similar conclusions to the ones that Jeff mentioned, Accenture came to. In this study, it was found that over the 10-year period beginning in 2020, 5G deployment would contribute $1.4 to $1.7 trillion to the US GDP and create an estimated 3.8 to 4.6 million jobs. But the study also found that every 6-month delay in 5G deployment could mean missing out on $25 billion of the potential 5G benefits anticipated between 2020 and 2030. An extended delay could even erode the comparative advantage that the US holds in many industries. And so for these reasons, we hope that municipalities will help us to minimize deployment delays because they absolutely matter.
Thanks, Beth, for those insights. Pierre, Luca, and Jeff, from a broad perspective, what can policymakers at all levels do to maximize the potential benefits from 5G?
I think from my perspective, reconnecting to what I was saying before, We have definitely a fragmentation of the policy. We don't need more policy. We need a better policy that can streamline the things that Beth just mentioned. We are on the right track, but the important thing is also education of the community and the political community about why 5G is so important, but more than that, why the transformation is so important. As we said, the use case that we can bring in rural community, the use case we can bring in a stadium where actually we are working for events and stuff like that, but the experience, the better way of life we can offer because the technology, it's extremely important to understand. People need to understand that when we speak about 5G, we not just speak about the connectivity. We're speaking about something that can enable a transformation in the day-to-day life and can make things better. Now, to me, it's also to notice that the challenge we have in US, we produce the best technology in the world. And we are far more advanced than everybody else. But we have a challenge to deploy this in our communities. And this has put us back in time on certain things. So we are very good on the business side. We are very good to create opportunity around the world. We are very good in advance the East and West Coast, but we have challenge in getting at the same level of, for example, certain European countries that they have a national policy that really force people to not force, but I will say give business advantage to people to adopt new technology. And that's the things that we see across the entire nation where we have pockets where we can't innovate. And so we create this very, very difficult divide between what we have in the rural community and what we have in the urban community. And that's not something that we should accept as a nation that innovate more than everybody else. I think that's a very important thing. And as I said, our goal in life, by the way, we need all of us together to transform and to make a better life to the people in those communities as the same chance that they have in the urban community. And so we can have a nation that progress all together. That's very important. So working on that kind of legislation, not many legislation, but a legislation that can progress, it's very important. In education, it's very important too. That's what we try to do also here when we start, right? That's why Jeff explained what is 5G. Policymakers, they don't need to be technical people. They don't need to understand, but they need to understand the bigger picture. They need to understand why it's important to drive certain technology because they really make a better place for the people.
I think that the other thing maybe to think about in this is that Beth brought up a really nice point around the sense of urgency in this situation. And Pierluca kind of highlighted that sense of urgency, that if you look at kind of 4G, we basically created a set of IP, and it was really control points for the US, right? If you look at Qualcomm from a modem perspective, Google from an operating system on Android. And when there was other countries who did things that were not in certain interests, you can shut those IP off, or you can actually control point those IP perspectives. Whereas you needed the network to be deployed, you needed connectivity to get there first in order to create all of these other intellectual property control points. If you follow kind of what Beth and Pierluca were describing, is there's like 3,000 counties in the United States. Each one of them has a different policy on how long it takes to permit, how many types of sound decibels you're allowed to have for a fan to cool down a radio, what is the aesthetics of something looks like. That's very different than other governments in other parts of the world that can basically say, we're going to deploy and we're going to deploy fast. So, Accenture had this, when we created this new cloud first network and 5G practice, there was a very clear thesis that we had, which was this digital transformation journey that we've been on for the past 5 to 10 years is really going to be dependent or bottlenecked or advantaged by network transformation and connectivity becoming a platform for innovation. And if we don't get to that last part of the thesis, it becomes this bottleneck. And if it does become this bottleneck, other innovation, other governments, other entities start to create this IP off of that network transformation, that network platform, that kind of connectivity. And all of a sudden, that IP is now shifted away. So that's why it's incredibly important to think about this as a sense of urgency from that perspective. If you look at kind of the different players involved, right? The communication service providers that, like Beth and folks here, they're under an incredible amount of pressure to transform their business, moving from 4G to 5G, and they're going to move from 5G to 6G 10 years from now, right? It's very difficult to move that type of transformation. It's a total enterprise transformation. And then if you look at kind of the enterprises that we talked about that we're trying to transform and give the benefit to society, a manufacturing plant that wants to improve worker safety, right? That's an example of a client that we're working with right now, that we're trying to improve worker safety so that you aren't having fatalities in the manufacturing environment with very heavy machinery or kind of fast spinning machinery. But how do we actually improve society from that? How do we kind of control the cost of what we're all adhering to right now, in a very difficult situation of inflation? This cost of development of products is rising. All of these raw materials are rising as a result. The consumers are actually bearing the brunt of that. How can 5G actually work to kind of control some of those costs, control worker safety and improve worker safety so that we actually kind of work through the macroeconomics. Even mining, when you get down to the atomized versions of this, that how do we actually think about mining differently? And again, mining is a very specific industry. And that's why this is so hard, that the potential of 5G is incredible, but each one of these is very specific in the industry that is required to understand. Mining has an above ground network size of multiple football fields and a below ground network where propagation is very different. And above ground can be one access technology, maybe below ground is something different. But understanding what each of these industries needs to actually go through, what the problems they actually are trying to solve. And that's what we think that, if there's one thing, it's one, have the sense of urgency as a collective group to understand that there's a lot of things riding on this. And the second thing is to understand that each of these industries is very specific, it's very custom, and it's very different to actually leverage 5G to solve it as a problem. I think are the two big points we'd like to bring up.
Finally, to wrap up this panel, let's bring this back to the AA-NHPI community. I'd like to ask each of our panelists how they see 5G as empowering our AA-NHPI communities, both in their daily lives and in organizing to promote our community's interests in broader national dialogues. Beth, let's start with you, and particularly from your perspective as a born and raised islander rather than a mainlander. What are your thoughts?
Sure. Thank you, John. Connecting to the digital world is the lifeblood of our modern economy and educational systems. We've talked today about the physical availability of 5G internet connectivity, but network deployment isn't the only issue we need to address to ensure that our AA-NHPI communities have access to the digital world. Many families in America, especially within the AA-NHPI community, do not have high-speed internet access at home, even though networks are physically available to them. A chief driver is income inequality, the economic gap between the rich and the poor. Pew Research has found that income inequality is actually greatest among Asian Americans. So to enable our AA-NHPI communities to better participate in national dialogues and in our digital economy, we need to continue to ensure that internet service, both fixed and mobile, are affordable for families who have low incomes, and to continue to encourage broadband adoption amongst people who don't use the internet and aren't online. To this end, AT&T participates in the federal ACP, or Affordable Connectivity Program, with both our fixed and mobile broadband offers. In fact, we offer an internet plan that provides eligible households with free internet service when combined with the federal ACP. We've also launched AT&T Connected Learning Centers that provide internet access and educational tools to students who face barriers to reliable internet connectivity. In California, Asian households are 7.6 percentage points less likely than white households to report having internet access. So in April, we launched a connected learning center in San Francisco at the Asian Pacific American Community Center. I'm especially proud that this AT&T initiative is helping to support Asian Americans and Pacific Islander students and families at the local level to help ensure that they can fully participate in our digital world and in national dialogues.
Pierluca, do you have some ideas and suggestions here?
I think to build on what Beth was saying about this or some of the initiative, that technology is part of the take on race and really focus on a coalition of like-minded company that they want to really serve in a community. As we pointed out, the low income are the people that they are most exposed to not having access to this ability. So as Dell, we are working in a partnership with Take on Race. And for example, at Harlem Children's Zone, we put in the hand of the people and the community hundreds of thousands of devices and the connectivity necessary to close this divide. I think for us is very important as we look at everything is happening, having a networking that we can create of Asian community where, for example, all the things where we suffered last year with the Asian aid and things that they've been affecting the community around the United States, it's very important to get connected. It's very important that people can connect, can be together, can exchange idea, can protect themselves, can also be listened. And so as Dell Technology, we make a priority to put in the hand of the all people. And as Jeff pointed out, industry, the ability to get connected, to process things, and to stay together. This sense of community needs to be larger than the local community. We need to create really a network. And to create a network, the base is to have connectivity that everybody can access. First, number one thing. And the other things is very important that we educate the people how they can use this technology. But more important, the outcome of this technology that we have in our solution and in our getting together with this initiative to make really the Asian community leveraging this opportunity to stay connected, to offer medical assistance, to offer to everybody a voice. And I think that's the most important thing, very close to my heart and to Dell as well, because in that way we can react quickly and we can also make better for the entire larger community. So it's a way to connect, it's a way to also break the barrier, and it's a way to make us listen. And sometimes, you know, especially in communities, difficult to be listened, and it's important to get connected through technology so we can do a lot of things. So I'm looking forward to all the possible policy that you guys can do for encourage everybody to adopt new technology, encourage everybody to understand, so educate again the policymaker that this is important not only for business. Business is the driver. There is a lot of money. There is a lot of jobs that can be created. But what we can do, the outcome is actually much more important. How we can change the day-to-day life. As Jeff pointed out, it's very verticalized, the edge where I work. There is an industry and manufacturing and retail, but there is also community, digital city. If we can bring all this revolution together, and we can also look at how we create community together, we're going to have a better world. And it's a race, by the way. So we cannot wait, okay? We need to give this opportunity to our people to leverage these new technologies. Thank you.
Thanks, Pierluca. Jeff, we will give you last word as our consultant.
It's so well said by both, Beth and Pierluca. I think that it's incredible to think about as a community what we would really do for each other is really important, but also what we do for, we would do anything for our kids to have a better life. We would do anything to honor and respect our aging community, right? So when you kind of look at those things, how can 5G actually help, right, to democratize education differently? Right now, a lot of times it's, sometimes the best educators are in a particular county and, they're really good at reaching and teaching kids, but they're not being able to kind of spread their message, right? So how could 5G potentially democratize that education to reach more people? When we think about our aging population, our advanced age population that is, dealing with some difficult things, how do we protect them? How do we make them feel safe? How do we make them feel supported? But also, how do we make them feel independent and being able to age in place and not have to actually think about depending on others? And what are ways that 5G and technology can reach, that part of the population in their homes or in where they're living? So, aging in place gracefully, making sure they're safe and supported. How do we actually kind of take some of those social outcomes that Pierre, Luca, and Beth just mentioned, and how do we actually make them a reality with technology? I think that's the biggest, most exciting thing that we're looking forward to. I think the other thing is the opportunity to engage into a new value chain that's moving very quickly. And as you heard, it's not just about connectivity, compute, storage, experience, solution. It's the entire value chain. And there's a lot of different ways to get involved. So that's what's also exciting about this.
Thanks to all our panelists for providing their insights into 5G and how it could transform both our society and be empowering for our AA and HPI community. Thanks again to APAICS for organizing the summit and for bringing us all together on this interesting topic. And thanks to all of our panelists. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Tanya, for having us. Thank you, everybody.
Welcome back to the 2022 APAICS Tech Summit. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Congresswoman Grace Meng. Congresswoman Meng is serving her 5th term in the United States House of Representatives, serving the 6th Congressional District of New York. She is the first and only Asian American member of Congress from New York State and the first female Congress member from Queens since former vice presidential nominee Geraldine Ferraro. Throughout her career, Congresswoman Meng has been a fierce advocate for expanding access to essential services and resources, including broadband internet for underserved communities. We are excited Congresswoman Meng has taken time to provide remarks on broadband access. Please give her a warm welcome.
Hi, I'm Congresswoman Grace Meng from Queens, New York. Thank you, Madeline and APAICS, for the invitation to share a few words. I'm honored to kick off today's panel discussion on challenges to broadband access, from infrastructure to digital literacy. Broadband access and digital literacy are important to thriving in today's world. We have seen an exponential growth in internet use in the US, which nearly doubled from 50% in the year 2000 to 93% by 2021. Millions of adults and students use the internet for school, staying in touch with loved ones, and applying for jobs. The access and literacy parts may seem unrelated, but both are central to closing the digital divide. Before COVID-19 consumed our nation, we knew that Americans, particularly those from low-income, minority, and rural communities, were struggling to participate in the digital ecosystem. For some, it was cost, and others, it was lack of access preventing them from fully participating in the 21st century. The pandemic exacerbated these issues, especially for students who lacked home broadband access to continue their studies from their kitchen tables or sofas. When our nation went on pause and sent students home, it was estimated that nearly 16 million students lacked access, meaning they missed out completely on their studies. In those dark days, they couldn't go to their local library or catch a free Wi-Fi signal from a local eatery. Their learning simply stopped. This was unacceptable. That's why I led the charge to create the over $7 billion Emergency Connectivity Fund at the FCC with Senator Markey that was part of the American Rescue Plan. No student should forego an education simply because they lack internet access. Thanks to my effort, millions of students and library patrons enjoy broadband access right from their homes. But due to the immense popularity and demand of this fund, it has run out of money. I'm working with Senator Markey and Van Hollen. We know how important this program is, and we know that this program must continue to ensure that no one is left offline. We recently sent a letter to Leader Schumer and Speaker Pelosi, urging them to replenish the fund. You can count on me to continue leading efforts in Congress to close the digital divide. Thanks again for having me, and I wish you a wonderful panel discussion.
Thank you for your leadership, Congresswoman Meng. Our second panel of the day, Challenges to Broadband Access from Infrastructure to Digital Literacy, will continue to touch on the subject of Congresswoman Meng's remarks. This panel will discuss the physical and social infrastructure that needs to be considered in order to enable the opportunities that high-speed internet can bring, particularly for underserved communities. I'd like to introduce Tu Nguyen, who serves as Executive Director for OCA National. A graduate from Rice University with degrees in chemistry and sociology, Tu found her way into the nonprofit sector through organizing Asian American students on campus and bridging partnerships between student groups and local Houston community organizations. Thank you, Tu, for moderating this important conversation.
The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the huge digital divide in low-income and other minority communities. Within that, two big subgroups that were impacted were students and elders. We saw the ISP industry, both cable and wireless companies, quickly mobilize to provide affordable broadband connections and step up in creative ways to alleviate the exacerbated digital divide we saw among students, elders, and small businesses. Today, we'll discuss with industry and community leaders what barriers we continue to see and what the next steps towards closing the digital divide. So to introduce our panel, first up, we have Anais Carmona, who serves as the Director of Federal Legislative Affairs for T-Mobile. In this capacity, Anais is responsible for representing T-Mobile's federal legislative interests before members of Congress on issues related to telecommunications and technology. Next, we have Annie Chung, who oversees and manages a Bay Area community-based organization called Self-Help for the Elderly that provides a comprehensive range of health, educational, social, and recreational services to over 40,000 seniors a year in the San Francisco Bay Area. And that's expanded to, of course, digital literacy as well. Next, we have Emilio Gonzalez, who's the Executive Director for Public Policy and Strategic Initiatives at Verizon, where he manages a wide-ranging external affairs portfolio and leads several internal strategic initiatives. And last but not least, we have Alka Patel, who currently serves as the Vice President of Government and External Affairs for Comcast in the Keystone region, focusing on advancing digital equity, having accrued over 20 years of experience working at the intersection of technology, business, law across private, academic, and government sectors. So thank you all for taking the time out of your day to discuss this really important and relevant topic to our community, especially the Asian American Pacific Islander community as well. Just to put it in context, over the past few years, we've seen companies such as yourselves here represented put out low-cost internet plans. And we've also seen the government, federal government, go from having the emergency broadband benefit during the pandemic to now implementing the Affordable Connectivity Program, or ACP, of which there are now over 12 million enrolled, I believe. But we also know that about 48 million Americans qualify for ACP. So from this panel's perspective, what are the barriers to broadband access for minority communities right now? And we'll start with you, Alka.
Great, thank you, Thu, and welcome everyone, and really honored and excited to be here with all of you as well as this distinguished panel, so appreciate it. So, it's a great question. It's a question that I think all of us think about who are in the space all the time. I think oftentimes the topic around adoption sort of falls into a couple of different, or barriers, I should say, falls into a couple of different buckets. So one around access, the other around affordability, and then the third piece being around adoption. And so just sort of speaking from a Comcast lens for a quick second here, especially with the pandemic, access was top of mind for us. And so we were really mindful around making sure that we had the opportunity to make sure that community centers and places where communities congregated had access through our Lift Zones program, as well as some of our hotspots. In regards to affordability, and I know Annie, I'm sure will probably address this as well, but we ensured, and we've had, frankly, a product that's been a low-cost product for over 10 years now, our Internet Essentials product. But I think it came to a lot of light during COVID to make sure, in terms of affordability, that our communities were also connected. And then, frankly, adoption is what we found as one of the biggest barriers. So earlier this year, I should say summertime this year, Comcast worked with the Boston Consulting Group, and we commissioned a study to really think about what is this barrier, what does it look like? And the focus was on adoption. And what came to light from this report was really a focus on the fact that digital navigators, could play a significant role in helping with adoption. So what do we mean by adoption, for example? So we are talking about helping communities who are not initially connected, get connected through a trusted partner. So trust, especially for our minority communities, is a critical factor. So organizations like Annie's out there are trusted partners to help bridge the gap, to have these minority communities understand what it means to be connected, how to get connected, get the skills that they need around this. What we also learned from this report is that in regards to trust, we really need to be talking about adoption from a holistic perspective. So it isn't just about how do we get connected, but how do we help meet the different basic needs of these individuals in these communities. So we're talking about whether it be around housing, childcare, education. And so once we've sort of addressed this holistically and thinking about the individual with all of their collective needs, we've built that trust, in which case now, all right, let's talk about connectivity to really take you to the next step to be part of the digital economy and really have the economic mobility. And so programs, again, like what self-help and Annie is doing are really critical to building that trust factor and developing digital navigators to help with the adoption piece.
Thank you, Alka. And I totally agree. I mean, OCA, our organization works with all of the partners here on the panel to also provide information to our members and community about like their different affordable internet plans. And I think that's been also super helpful to hear from OCA. And so Annie, I want to hear from you then, what was the programming like, and what are some of the barriers that you're seeing your community in the Bay Area, the seniors you serve, their barriers to adoption? What have you been working on for that? Yeah.
Thank you too, and thank you, Tanya and APAICS, for putting this panel together. Closing the digital divide has been one of our top priorities, and this is our 56th anniversary for self-help for the elderly. So you could imagine for the past 30 years, we've been really working towards closing the divide. And thanks to Comcast, when they came out with the Internet Essentials program, they didn't just come up with the affordability for a lot of the low-income students, families, and seniors to get connected, but they also enable the community-based organizations like self-help and like a few other CBOs to teach the community how to navigate, how to use the internet, and how to use the different devices that they have. We were always joking a little bit that usually for lower income seniors and families, their devices are hand-me-downs. Like they don't go and buy a new device, right? But they were given a device that sometimes a little bit couldn't really be used because either it's too old or they didn't have the right software. So I think that Comcast provided us a partnership that is quite amazing. Through the past over 10 years, they've provided ongoing support for a minimum of 40 such internet classes to be taught in the community to the people who just signed up with the Internet Essentials. So now, just as Elka said, you not only have the affordable access, but now you have the opportunity to give them basic training and skills. And then the third very important element is the content. So for limited English proficiency community, right, we call them the LEPs. For these communities, they really needed someone to help bridge that divide by providing the right content culturally as well as linguistically. So with the three, we call it the ABCs of the digital divide, and working with companies like Comcast and other telecom carriers, as well as the government. You talked about the ACP program earlier, and that's a very, very important program. And ever since the program was introduced, our community have connected over, I just looked up the statistic, 971 seniors to get on the ACP so that they don't lose a chance, right, to get the $30 to pay for the internet. So I think all this helped us close the divide a little bit, but it's an ongoing process. And we have to continue to look to government, industries, as well as the community to help our community.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the language barrier is an important piece because even when we're trying to outreach about ACP in our own communities, sometimes the only thing that gets across is that it's an affordable internet plan, and people don't even know that there's actually like a discount for devices, right? That's part of ACP. And so there's just a lot more in-language resources that are needed. We'll go to you, Anais. What have you been seeing as barriers for adoption, which is being highlighted as one of the highest barriers here?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we all have issues with affordability, reliability, accessibility. For T-Mobile, we've really built our business around meeting our customer where they are. And what this means is it's been reported that Latino, Black, and other minority groups use wireless as their first and sometimes only lifeline to the internet. And so we over-index, our communities do over-index on mobile use for our daily life. And that we take as a huge responsibility. So T-Mobile brands currently serve, I think, about 95% of Black consumers, 96% of Hispanic consumers, and 98% of Asian consumers nationwide. And so with the pandemic at the forefront, and T-Mobile's kind of creative way of price planning, we have provided a plan literally for everyone, whether it's prepaid or postpaid or close to close the digital divide, but to also give our communities a chance to compete in the digital economy, whether that's a small business or a marginalized community, which is key. So our mission is really to ensure that all Americans are connected, regardless of geography, demographics, and income. And affordability is a huge part of that. At the beginning of the pandemic, for example, in March of 2020, T-Mobile launched not one, but two lower priced plans, one at $15 a plan for 2 gigabytes of data, and another one for $25 that included 5 gigabytes of smartphone data. So if you think about it, a $25 and a $15 plan goes a long way for those communities that are really in need. And this year, we also expanded our Connect by T-Mobile offerings by launching the lowest industry priced prepaid plan with talk, text, and high-speed data starting at just $10 a month. So, you can't go to the grocery store and buy, in most cities, a coffee for that. And we think that that's something that is equitable because people need this resource. And then for our older customers, I know that was something that was previously talked about. We also amped up our family plans. We currently offer a subsidized plan for seniors and for our customers that are older than 55. And that also includes active duty military and veterans, which are crucial to our society. And this includes our highest discount, which is about 50% off family lines. And also just, at a time when inflation is going up and our competitors are raising prices, we are the only ones, or one of the only ones, committed to sticking to our affordable options. In May of just this year, just to bring peace to the mind of those communities and those customers who rely on our service for their day-to-day, we announced our price lock guarantee, which is a commitment to customers who are joining T-Mobile or are switching, that we won't raise the price of their wireless service. And we think that goes a long way. So accessibility was another thing that we discussed. And, we went into communities during the pandemic and before and provided hotspots, jobs, low-cost products that were probably the most competitive and lowest in the business. And we came up with creative ways to address those customer pain points. So as you know, and as a partner to APAICS, we launched Project 10 Million, which is a 5-year, $10.7 billion effort to close the digital divide in the homework gap by offering these school districts free internet access, mobile hotspots to serve up to, more than 10 million eligible households. And to date, it is really exciting to tell you that T-Mobile has connected an astounding 3.2 million students thus far. I know linguistics was one of the things that we discussed, and we meet the customer where they are. At our T-Mobile stores, we have specific employees that have linguistic capabilities. I know there's one store in the Bronx, for example, that are cumulatively our employees speak up to 18 languages. So you're able to explain the services, products in their native language, which we think is really, really key. And, one of the things that has come out of this pandemic and the need for connectivity and has contributed to closing the digital divide is T-Mobile's partnerships with organizations to identify what those needs are, but also creative product launching, like the launching of our 5G in-home broadband, which is the first of its kind, a $50 a month, up to 50% savings. So when you're really talking about T-Mobile and what we're doing, not only pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, but after, it's clear that we're in the community. It's clear that the digital divide is an imperative business pillar of what we do, and we take that responsibility very seriously.
No, so we've seen the federal government step up, and they've provided $65 billion via the infrastructure bill for a program called Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment, or also known as BEAD, which is done via the NTIA. And we've talked a lot about, or we've mentioned adoption a lot. And Anis, you've mentioned a little bit about, neighborhoods and wireless, communities over-indexing as wireless. So there's a lot that needs to be discussed between local, state, federal governments, what they're doing, and then also what the industry is doing. I want to I want us to talk about like what needs to happen between the two sides to speed up and work more quickly towards the closure of the digital divide. So we'll go to you, Emilio. What are you seeing that needs to happen between the different levels of government and the industry, the support that both sides need?
Thank you, Thu, and thank you to APAICS for pulling this event together. This is a timely and important conversation. At the onset, let me just say that Verizon provided a very robust response to the pandemic, which put a spotlight on the digital divide, and it included everything from $10 million in grants to small businesses, to working with school districts to provide discounted Wi-Fi hotspots that serve 30 million students across the country, to something I'm very proud of, which was a $15 million donation to the Stop AAPI Hate initiative, which is also a sad reality as a result of this pandemic. Shifting gears to your question, building networks, whether they be fiber or small cell 5G networks, is a really complex endeavor. You have to lay out capital many years in advance, design these networks, test them, etc. When you start to deploy these networks, you have to deal with state and local governments, predominantly local municipalities. And I've seen organizational charts of what this looks like, and it's extremely complex. But I think there's some key things that have to happen in order to deploy equitably and quickly. And one of those is strategic partnerships with the municipality, with the advocate nonprofit community, just like Annie was mentioning, and that there be compromise in the negotiations so that we can reach win-win situations on things like right-of-ways, access to poles where we would attach these small cells that now comprise what are 5G networks. What are going to be the fees, regulations? Can we access a building where a building owner might have an exclusive agreement with a provider? And if that building owner says we cannot access that building, that's it. We can't get in there to provide service and alternatives for consumers. I think there are great examples of municipalities that have brought all this together, and we have been able to quickly deploy and put out, for example, fixed wireless through 5G, or even in the 4G LTE world. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, we don't get to flip a switch and we have a new network. It requires time, capital, compromise, and partnerships.
Thank you, Emilio. And Alka, I want you to weigh in on this as well, and kind of what, with technology kind of developing so quickly, right? I feel like we just had LTE, 4G LTE, and now we're already at 5G. So what kind of like timeline are we looking at? And, with all these grants coming out, I know also via states, like, does that help speed up the timeline that we're looking at?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And great question. And I'm actually going to double down on what Emilio had shared, right? So, when we think about timeline, and when people are thinking, okay, all this money is coming out at the federal state level around go help our rural communities get connected. There's so many other moving parts, right? So all of the entities that Emilio was talking about, we are dependent, codependent. There's so many interdependencies between all of these different sort of pieces, whether it's utility organizations, pole organizations, right, that have to be coordinated and function collectively. So I definitely want to double down on everything that Emilio had said, and why that's so important from a timeline perspective. I also think, sort of two other aspects. One is, I frankly think, because there's so much attention on this, and rightfully so, right? I think this is one of our most important issues that we need to address of our times for society and humanity. I would truly believe that if we don't fix this or address this digital divide at this point, it's just going to grow bigger and get harder to get our arms around. But at the same time, there needs to be coordination across federal, state, and local governments, right? Because they're all they have all different levels of understanding. They have all different levels of resources. They have all different levels of being able to address this issue. And so there's sort of that coordination piece within government. And then I think there's this public-private partnership aspect, which I think Amelia was also getting at, that's also necessary to get this right. But one of the things that definitely keeps me up at night is that when we think about all these monies that are coming out, every state is developing its own program, right? They're all going to have their own approach based, of course, on sort of their demographics and their needs and so forth. But as each state develops its own approach, based on perhaps different timelines, right? What happens when we think about the equity conversation and how are we getting to all of our communities, and are we going to get to them all at the same time so that we're actually moving the needle and making sure they are part of this digital economy is going to be a challenge, right? And I think about how does that play out in terms of equity? So if one state's ahead, another state's sort of in the middle of the planning, another state's just beginning their planning. And not to mention, how are the programs actually structured within each state? And what does oversight, frankly, look like to make sure that these funds are being utilized for the actual intent that they were set out to be utilized? And so I just think that there's still a lot of pieces around this that need to be defined and need to be structured to make sure that the communities who are in the most need are actually being given the care and attention that they need for connectivity, and that there is sort of accountability around this as well. Again, thinking about all the various coordination pieces, either within government, within private industry, or across, and then these partnerships that I think are so critical, because we do need to be aligned with our community partners just as much to get some of these programming to really get the benefit and the outcomes we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for laying that out. And I agree. I mean, it's not just education of like the general public about ACP, but I do know that a lot of government officials who are making policies around this also need to be educated on the realities of actual deployment. Like Amelia, you said, it takes a lot of time and research and stuff like that. Anais, what about you? What are some things that you're seeing that need to happen on both the federal government or the government side and industry?
Government usually have good intentions when they, move some of these very big programs like ACP out to the community. But usually they forget that a large part of the community really have language barrier, cultural barrier, income barriers, and it's not easily. They don't understand that you have to really go partner with someone that the community trusts, particularly with refugees and immigrant communities. Sometimes they came from countries that are very leery or very suspicious of government. And sometimes, despite that there's, this $30 to pay for your internet out there, but if they didn't understand or have someone to explain it to them or help them, get onto the program, they're likely to just forgo it. So I think that programs like ACP or other low-income programs that federal government came out when they tried to address the broadband, equity kind of a program, you really need to go back to the community and first identify the barriers and then find the community partners like Elka and both Emilio were saying, find the trusted parties that people go to already for social services, nutrition meals, childcare, and then you add on, the broadband issues with them. Now they have someone to say, oh, if I get on it, will I get in trouble? Will I get deported? Will the government, do something to me? All of those. So if they have that assurance, then I think that the program could move pretty smoothly. But for example, when the state came out, when California came out with the broadband project, we applied for and got 180 devices, iPads, to be shared, right, with the low-income seniors and families. But there are a lot of rules and limitations. Should it be a loan program? Should it be straight ownership? How do we guarantee that the people that got these devices are using it, and so on and so forth? So it does take quite a while for both our local Department of Disabilities and Aging, we call DAS, right, to work out those issues with the community partners. And then we, go out and then get those people that needed these devices and get them on the device. But it really takes time. So I would say that with government partners, first, with a good intent is great, but do look for the trusted partners that could be like your spokespeople, your liaisons, and for sure they're going to need some language and direct assistance to get on these wonderful programs. So it's very important. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, the FCC has been doing some outreach. NTIA has been doing some outreach to community organizations that are connected, like the trusted voices that have language accessibility. But I think also there's that education piece there too, is that there's money out there for these community organizations to do the education and outreach efforts to our community that can tap into ACP and such. So yeah, thank you, Annie. So next, and my last question of this conversation, because I think, now we kind of see what are kind of the barriers, what are we working on right now, but what's next, or what's on your radar in the coming year or so? I know midterms elections are coming up. The FCC has a couple of new things on their agenda. And so, from your organization standpoint, community organization or your industry company, what's on your radar right now in terms of closing the digital divide, some things that you're monitoring? So we'll start with Anais. What is T-Mobile looking to right now or working on?
Yeah, so, after the T-Mobile Sprint merger, T-Mobile is just working on being the best carrier out there, being the most customer friendly, and really solving those customer pain points. And we've seen some quarters of pretty impressive growth. We're also, launching new products like the in-home broadband that I mentioned, but we're just trying to get as many people on the T-Mobile nationwide 5G network. And that's kind of exciting. On the homework gap or digital divide, we're focusing on these small hometown rural grants in which we identify, small cities or small towns across all America that are considered rural, so size and location. And we're funding projects all across the United States. And that's been really impressive, whether it's connecting, a lab or whether it's a baseball field, like things that these communities really need. And we're getting into these communities in a really resourceful and creative way. We're, trying to grow our in-home broadband and giving consumers choices. You should be able to choose who your provider is. And we think that that's really key. And we also hope that that choice is obviously us. And then just going back to the technical, ensuring that spectrum pipeline and that spectrum auction authority is extended on a short-term 18-month basis is really key to ensure that us in the private sector continue working efficiently as we can to grow our spectrum assets and bring those benefits to American consumers. And, the digital divide, we all play a very important part. And I think the pandemic brought broadband to the forefront of a lot of people's minds because we don't realize how much we rely on our broadband or wireless service. And I think it's key that any legislation that continues to be passed and any funds that are allocated towards broadband take into consideration tech neutrality, which means that you're meeting the customer where they are. They may not be needing, cable or their fixed wireless, but they might be, moving from place to place. And so wireless and their phone and that mobility that wireless provides is really key. And we've seen that through the pandemic, and we see that in our business models moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you. How about you, Emilio?
I think there are a number of things that are important to closing the divide, and I think the ACP program and the BEAD, which you've mentioned, are historical steps in that direction. I worked for the Clinton administration many years ago when we started a grant program to connect nonprofits to this thing at the time called the Information Superhighway. And back then, I believe our budget was just under 30 million. So these are big investments that are necessary, particularly if we're going to connect rural America and give them access to broadband that is worthy of what they need. I would say a couple of things. Overall, from a big picture point of view, I think any of us in industry, we need predictability so we can plan and invest. And that means, clear rules and policies of the road for things like, for example, we need a national online privacy bill that protects consumers, gives them the rights they need, but also gives us clarity as to how to handle information and data. So, for example, in a mobile world where you might be starting a call in Maryland, drive through DC and end up in Virginia, it's very hard to have three different set of rules as you move. So we're looking to Congress to hopefully come up with a bipartisan compromise and provide a meaningful set of privacy rules and protections for consumers, and that give us clarity so we can protect their data and continue to move forward there. I think access to spectrum, which is the lifeblood of wireless, is also an important one. Talk about timing and deployment. On average, between securing spectrum at auction and putting it to work and clearing that band and testing it, you're talking anywhere from 5 to 10 years to make that a reality. So the more the FCC can put out there quickly, the more all of us benefit on this. And finally, I would mention that ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Program, has been a great success. To date, I believe over 13 million subscribers are benefiting from this. Comcast, T-Mobile, Verizon, we all providing a suite of services that with the $30 discount, you basically have free wire or wireless broadband, depending on your needs and wants. The program has been successful, but that also means that the program, which is basically Congress allocated about 5 years of funding for, is starting to face some constraints financially. And there are projections from some very credible economists that it could be late 2023, very early 2024, that the funding might run out. So I put that out there for APAICS and for the community advocates to start thinking about how do we encourage continuation of this great program that has finally helped so many families get and stay connected.
Thank you, Emilio. Alka, how about you? What's next?
Sure, and I'm gonna continue the thread on ACP for a moment because I really think from a grassroots level, right? I think one of the biggest challenges that we've seen, and Annie's touched on this already, but I do want to double down on it, is awareness. Are our communities even aware that ACP is available, right? So how do we really tackle awareness and outreach? And so one of the things that we've been doing a lot around is going out into these communities and just making sure that they are aware of it. And frankly, even some local elected officials who may not be aware of it, right? And so doing a lot of education and awareness as well as outreach. I do want to say too, as Annie was talking, and she was talking about how some of these communities are leery about trusting government. That's true, right? I mean, as part of this program, you do have to enter some information. And for those who might be a little bit concerned about what they're entering, how it's going to be utilized is always a consideration. But having said that, signing up for anything in the federal government, for the most part, I used to work in the federal government, so I hope people don't mind me saying this, but can be a challenge. And so again, how do we sit down with individuals and actually be partners in helping them get through that process? Because it's not easy, right? And especially for the individuals who need it the most, it can be very daunting. And so really a big focus on our end is how do we really advance awareness, outreach, and then assist individuals who need to sign up. And I think that's really how we move the needle, at least on a grassroots level. The other pieces I'll just share again, because part of my role is really being on the ground and working with these community partners on a day-to-day basis. And so I'm really proud too that Comcast this year has announced its $1 billion commitment under its Project Up umbrella. And so the LIP zones that I had mentioned earlier sort of falls under that umbrella. But another one that I want to highlight is our RISE program as well, which is really focused on minority small businesses. And we know these small businesses are the heart of our communities. And so how are we also caring for those organizations, and especially minority owned, especially coming out of the pandemic and so forth. And so how can we support them? And so how do we continue to do that as part of our plan as well? And then really, again, with my lens of being on the ground, we'll say working with community partners to advance the concept of being digital navigators. So how does that play out, whether it plays out in terms of the ACP signups? And I should say too, another point Annie had raised, which was really spot on, was around language access, especially for our communities. I mean, how many languages within the Asian umbrella are there? And so we've been really taking the lead internally around pushing and making sure that our materials are accessible in various languages. And so we've got them available in over 35 languages, over 10 Asian languages, and continuing to increase that number because we know that is one of those barriers. But how do we think about opportunities and programs, whether it be around digital literacy? This intergenerational program that Annie's talking about is phenomenal, right? Because how do you're creating trust. Oftentimes seniors, and I'll say my parents even, they won't come to me with their tech issues. They'll go to my kids, right? And so, frankly, I go to my kids sometimes too. But, how do we sort of create and build that trust? And trust comes in many different ways. Trust comes in many different forms. Trust is different for different communities. And so how do we address that? How do we find a solution to really advancing that? And whether it be organizations like self-help, our library institutions, our boys and girls clubs, things of that nature, and even OCA, right? I know we're doing some programs with OCA. And so there are already organizations that are on the ground doing this. And so let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's figure out how we partner together to really maximize on the results that we're looking forward to. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Alka. Yeah, the intergenerational piece also is really important. I mean, I think even in our own offices, as we're seeing, new generation of workers showing within the office, the digital divide and digital literacy there too, right? Annie, you've been doing some great programs during the pandemic when the world was virtually online, basically online. And now we're kind of moving into kind of a hybrid. Some are moving back in person. So what's next for you in terms of what you're doing in your community for the seniors and their families?
I think as Elker and as Emilio and as Annie say, closing the digital divide is our priority, almost number one, because it's almost like a what we call a human rights issue nowadays. It's not only just a necessity, right, to have internet. If you have children and you've all read about stories how the kids have to go by to a McDonald's in order to do their homework, it's just so heartbreaking, right? Why the richest and the strongest country in the world had population that are still so underprivileged and underserved. And so closing this gap is kind of like closing the poverty gap, is a top priority for government, industry leaders, as well as community organizations. So for us, as long as there's still a divide, we need to find some ways to get devices, get the iPads, the Chromebooks, the tablets, the smartphones to our low-income communities to help them bridge this digital divide. And secondly, whenever we think of there's federal, state, and local programs that are available, we at the community need to aggressively go look for those funding and in a way fight for them. And as Emilio pointed out, we cannot let ACP just stop, right? After you get 20 million people on the program, then you say, oh, sorry, starting next year, there's going to be no more subsidy. So where do people turn? So we just have to continue to advocate that our leaders would continue this type of subsidy so that the community that needed the connectivity, the affordable connectivity, will continue to have it. So we're going to continue work with our partners to make sure that it doesn't just stop in 2024, but it will continue. So, but we need our government leaders, elected officials, to know that 99% of the public assistance programs you have to apply online. Probably 100% of all job application, even down to the minimum pay jobs, you have to go online now and apply. So how could you leave out even 10% of our community that is not connected? That's really an issue that we all have to think about. But I want to say that while we work so hard, but we're really grateful and thankful for community supporters, really like our telecom and other carriers that care for the community. And without us asking every year, Elka, Lorena, can you continue our funding? They come to us and say, Annie, we have this money set aside for the 40 internet essential classes. Can you program them and schedule them? So there's a continuity, of this efforts going on. I forgot to mention that for 12 years, we were supported by, again, Comcast on the Digital Connector program. These are high school kids that go through one semester of leadership training and on how to, utilize technology to further their career and their studies. But at the end of the semester, these kids are asked to do a community service project. And throughout the past 12 years, our graduates have been coming back to the community and help train and teach the essential classes to the elderly, to the families with children, to the kids. So I thought that this intergeneration and continuous partnership provides such a positive impact, on the community, that we just have to believe that with the support, with the government partnership and the community partners, that we could really make a real effort to close the divide in a certain number of years. And I hope that maybe within 10 years, we could say 100% of the Americans enjoy high-speed broadband. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to keep pushing and working hard. Yeah.
Thank you, Annie. Yeah, and I can add to that for OCA, what's on our radar for bridging the digital divide is also the data disaggregation, right? We're all here for APAICS, so we're all representing the Asian Pacific American community in one way or another. And one of the misconceptions out there is that all Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders are connected to the internet, but they're not, right? And there's a gap of information there that I know OCA is working on. All of our partners here are working on. So it's really important because we're not a monolith. We're not a model minority. In fact, one of my good friends who is an Ivy graduate, his family home didn't get Wi-Fi connection until after he had graduated and was able to, and that was in the past couple of years, right? So it's quite, these stories are every day around us that we know we need to shed light on. And I mean, that's why we're having this panel as well. So thank you for the call to actions from everyone, right? I think the number one takeaway is that ACP needs to have continued funding, along with continued partnerships between government, industry, and our community partners. Once again, thank you all for taking the time out of your day to enlighten us on kind of what you're working on and what barriers there are. Thank you to APAICS for hosting the Tech Summit. We look forward to hearing other enlightening conversations about tech and digital literacy in the future. So thank you all.
Thank you. Great. Thank you.
Welcome back to the 2022 APAICS Tech Summit. For those who are just tuning in, I'm Madeline Milka, President and CEO of APAICS, and I'm honored to introduce our next speaker, KPAC Chair and APAICS Board Member, Congresswoman Judy Chu. Chairwoman Chu was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives to California's 27th District in 2013 after serving California's 32nd District from 2009. She has championed a number of causes in Congress and has used her extensive experience as a legislator and educator to help improve our nation's education system, helping pass a landmark college affordability bill to boost federal college grants and keep student loan interest rates low, as well as introducing a bill that will maintain adequate federal funding for much-needed school lunch programs. She has also unveiled a new program for awarding school improvement grants called Strengthening Our Schools. Let's give a warm welcome to KPAC Chair and APAICS Board Member, Congresswoman Judy Chu.
Hello, I'm Congressmember Judy Chu from California's 27th District and the chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, or as we call it, KPAC. I'm thrilled to join you for today's APAICS 2022 Tech Summits panel on diversifying career pathways into the tech field. This is such an important topic right now, so I want to extend a big thank you to APAICS President Madeline Milka and the rest of her team for putting together today's event. STEM education is incredibly valuable for our nation. Skills like coding, programming, engineering not only ensure that the U.S. remains at the forefront of progress, but also provides us the critical tools to tackle monumental challenges. From the climate crisis to infectious disease and so much more, the opportunities to spur innovation and pave the way to a better and brighter future for all are truly limitless. Over the past few weeks, President Biden has signed into law several key pieces of legislation to address some of these challenges. Most recently, we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which makes the single largest investment in tackling the climate crisis in our nation's history. The CHIPS and Science Act will also bolster our domestic semiconductor chip supply chain and accelerate research and development to ensure the U.S. remains a global leader in science and technology. As we continue to look forward, a strong STEM workforce is going to be crucial to the success of both of these landmark laws. However, many students are intimidated about STEM or lack the opportunities to do so. I am proud to say, though, that Congress is prioritizing addressing this issue. For example, the CHIPS and Science Act includes critical funding to support outreach to and research at minority serving institutions, or MSIs, including Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander serving institutions, or what we call AA-NHPI SIs. These provisions were included because we know how important MSIs are to building STEM pathways. By supporting MSIs, we are directly supporting students of color who choose to study at these institutions across the nation. That is why I've made supporting these important institutions one of KPAC's top priorities. In 2019, when funding for both MSIs and AA-NHPI SIs was under threat, I worked with my colleagues in the Tri-Caucus to renew funding for them. Initially, we thought we may only get 2 years of funding, but I'm thrilled to say we secured permanent funding for these institutions, meaning they don't need to be funded each year anymore. We also secured federal dollars specifically for STEM education at MSIs. I've also continued to push for increased funding for AA-NHPI's SIs overall. And I'm proud to tell you today that those efforts have culminated in nearly doubling the funding level for these critically important schools this year. Congress has taken action to support the STEM pipeline in the past few years, but there is so much more to be done, especially on the ground level, as we put all this funding for STEM education to use. That's why I'm so happy that APAICS is hosting today's summit and bringing more attention to how we can best strengthen this pipeline. Thank you for everything you all do to support STEM education within the AAPI community, and have a wonderful summit.
Thank you, Chairwoman Chu, for your remarks, for your leadership of KPAC, and for your continuing support of APAICS. Next, we have a panel entitled Diversifying Career Pathways into the Tech Field. This candid discussion will highlight the gaps that still exist in the education and tech ecosystems that prevent more widespread participation in tech from the most underrepresented communities. Our moderator for this panel is Kan Vu. Kan joined the Society of Asian Scientists and Engineers, SAS, full-time as the executive director in late 2011. He oversaw the doubling of the collegiate chapters and tripling its membership during his first year of tenure with SAS, which makes it the largest professional Asian American organization in the United States. Welcome to Kan and to our panelists.
I'm excited to be here with you today. I am Kan Vu, the moderator, and I want to introduce our esteemed panelists. First, we have Matthew and Falola Malale, founded the Pacific Islanders Encouraging Fun Engineering, Science, and Technology, PIFest for short, in South San Francisco, California. The nonprofit organization's mission is to improve Pacific Islanders' representation and increase access to science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM for short, related careers. We also have Jennifer Zhao, is a Toyota Motor North America's IT executive leading the mobility production systems transforming in R&D, manufacturing, vehicles and parts, supply chains. That's a lot, a mouthful there. That's a lot of responsibility, Jennifer. Jennifer is responsible for delivering world-class IT solutions to enable Toyota to run the core business operation and exceed customers' expectation in the highly competitive automotive market. Portia Wu is the managing director of the U.S. public policy for Microsoft, where she oversees a team tackling federal policy issues critical to the technology industry and handles policy regarding workforce, skills, and immigration. During the Obama administration, Wu served as Assistant Secretary of the Employment and Training Administration at the U.S. Department of Labor, where she oversaw billions of dollars in federal workforces and training investment. That's a lot of responsibility there. And Weebly leads the content production engineering and operation teams that powers Trailhead, the fun and free way to learn Salesforce. She has been at the company for 7 years, working on the intersection of technology innovation and global impact in various roles. She is passionate about workforce development, non-traditional education, and helping underrepresented groups break into tech. So let's welcome our panelists. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We have a lot of things to talk about, so let's jump into the questions quickly here. Korn Ferry stated that in tech, the U.S. could lose out on $162 billion worth of revenues annually unless it finds more high-tech workers. Can you respond to this statement and share what your organization is doing with respect to the gap? We'll start with Portia.
I think that's absolutely true. And this is why right now every industry is a tech industry. So if you're in car manufacturing or education or healthcare, you need a lot of workers with technology skills. And so let me just give one example. For example, in cybersecurity, which is an area that Microsoft focuses on a lot, I think something like in the last 12 months, there were something like 600,000 or more job openings posted in cybersecurity in the United States. And a lot of those still go unfilled. At the same time that we have those openings, we had 3,000 people get cybersecurity associate's degrees in 2020, which is the last year for which we have data. So you can see that's a huge imbalance. Some things that Microsoft is doing to address this, and it's sort of everyone has to come to the table to help work together to address the problem. Education, government, nonprofits, and the corporate sector. And I think something that we're doing that we're really trying to focus on is understanding that there are many pathways to acquiring technology skills. That could be a 4-year degree, but it could be a community college course. It can be online certifications. Can be apprenticeship. It can be programs for transitioning service members. And all of those are things that Microsoft is investing in. And I'll just say one more thing, because I know we have a lot of great contributions from everyone on the team. I think something we've really noticed is we need to find sort of multiple roads in. And that first means K through 12 computer science education, because we know that if young people have a computer science class in high school, they're way more likely, especially young people of color, to go on to study that in post-secondary education. So we've got to have that there. Lots of schools in this country still have no computer science offerings at the high school level, especially to Spanish schools. So we really need to bridge that gap. And then also for people who are later in career, maybe a returning parent, maybe someone who's transitioning from a low wage or service sector job where they just don't feel like they have as much opportunity to get better wages and more skills. So we need to have all of these pathways for individuals to come into the sector, because there's plenty of work to be done. And it's wonderful to have a more diverse and creative workforce that helps our technology to be better and helps our company and our communities to be stronger and to thrive.
600,000. Wow. That's a huge number. And, as you said, we're going to need everybody's hand on deck to make sure that we can fill those jobs. So, Anne, your thoughts?
Thanks so much for having Salesforce here and for inviting us. I'm excited to learn from everyone here and what they're doing. And like Portia said, it's going to take everyone from every industry to work together on this. So, I mean, the idea of the U.S. losing $162 billion in revenue from not having talent is a staggering statistic. And what's happening is that in tech, we are moving, and every business needs to have digital transformation. They are transforming every single part of their business. This is sales, this is marketing, this is operations, and those are jobs: sales, marketing, operations, every part of the business. There's an opportunity for people to skill up and work and to join in to both support business and to take advantage of these opportunities. So I think we should hear the excitement, around education and government policy as we all kind of work together and think a little bit differently. As we think about the Salesforce economy, we're a job creator. So not just at Salesforce are we hiring, but we're also have a whole economy of businesses that we partner with. And we did some studying about it. And so we expect 1.6 trillion in new business and to add 9.3 million jobs in this economy by 2026. And so the way that we need to really work together is to equip people for jobs of today, for jobs of tomorrow, and that we need to have this cycle of reskilling and upskilling so everyone can participate in this economy that's emerging. So I hear a lot of opportunity in that statistic as long as we all work together.
Yeah, 2026 is not that far away when you talk about.
It is not.
It is not. So yeah, there's a lot of excitement in it. And I appreciate you sharing that, and that there's a lot of opportunity in the statistics. So thank you. Jennifer, your thoughts on the quote?
Echo everyone's comments. Everybody is in the technology field these days. And from the Toyota perspective, we are in the middle of doing a digital transformation. We're trying to move from the automotive industry to a mobility industry and transforming the company into a mobility company. And what that means is not only to mobilize people, but also to mobilize goods and also mobilize data. And cybersecurity obviously is the arms around it to keep us safe and gain our customers' trust. And what we're doing though is, echo everybody was saying, we need to start young. And what Toyota is doing now is partnering with the Dallas ISD, the school district, and also the university, and also the West Dallas community, and start a pre-K to STEM school in the Dallas area. And we committed $2 million to get it started. Is really to start a project-based STEM curriculums and provide real-time and real-life examples and practice, and then start young. And we also recently committed $110 million to education and career readiness, because we need more talent and more diverse talent in the workforce. And it is really trying to prepare the workforce of the future by providing a much broader education and getting the next generation ready for the high growth career, which I'm personally in right now. I'm in the tech for my whole career, very excited for that. And also try to address the inequity that we have and that created barriers for to succeed. And that's, I think, is going to help improve the life in United States as well. So that's really from the pre-K to 12. And the other thing that we also did was really focusing on the college. So for example, my career started in Kentucky, and we recently announced that Kentucky plant will invest $1.7 million in partnering with 3 different schools and really providing that full tuition scholarship for female and minority students. And I think that will create a really, really good platform and also the talent pipeline into the workforce, and can't wait to see what we can do.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's increasing the pipeline is critical to solving this problem, both at early stage and later stages. And as the previous, Anne and Portia mentioned, that diversifying the pipeline is critical to part of the solution, as you pointed out, Jennifer. Thank you. And talking about diversity, Matthew and Falola, you guys are in the thick of it there in South San Francisco. Your thoughts on the problem statement there?
Thank you for the question, Con. Before I answer, I'd also like to just thank APAICS for inviting us to participate in this panel. As parents of young children, we've got 3 kids, pre-K to 3rd grade right now. Education and career opportunities are 2 really important topics that Lola and I discuss fairly often when it comes to preparing our children for the future. And living in San Francisco, the Bay Area, amidst all the big tech companies and tech-heavy startups of Silicon Valley, it's apparent that high-tech careers pay more than non-high-tech careers, right? So that being said, also, it excites us to hear that tech companies are creating more opportunities and creating pathways to high-tech careers, especially at the high school and collegiate levels. Additionally, though, I think it's important to note that for marginalized communities, early exposure to STEM and tech learning and representation are vital to children and youth feeling confident enough to take part in these pathways that are being created. So my wife and I are both first-generation Pacific Islanders, and we come from communities that continue to be underrepresented and underserved, especially as it relates to STEM and tech careers. So we founded this nonprofit organization, PIFES, Pacific Islanders Encouraging Fun, Engineering, Science, and Technology, as a way to help improve Pacific Islanders representation and increase access to STEM-related careers. PIFES, we serve children in grades K through 5, and we intentionally focus on early exposure to STEM learning, and we weave in Pacific Islander culture by connecting STEM concepts to the histories of innovation, ingenuity, and exploration of our ancestors.
I also just wanted to echo how excited I am to hear about all of these different opportunities and pathways that, a lot of the companies like Anne and Jennifer and Portia had mentioned are all these intentional ways that they're creating opportunities for our communities. It's really exciting. So.
Yeah, it is a very exciting time. All the investment that these organizations are putting into creating the next talent for their workforce, really. And talking about the education, the tech ecosystem, what are the challenges that still exist in the education and tech ecosystems that prevent more widespread participation in technology from the most underrepresented communities? Jennifer, you have some thoughts on that?
I'll share a personal experience on this one. I have one kid, and when he's now in 7th grade, but when he was in 3rd grade, and the school was having a career day, so we got really excited, and I showed him the flyers, and I look at the flyer, and my heart sank a little bit because the flyer was in suits and ties. And my first reaction was I told my kid and say, Eliana don't need to wear a suit and tie to have a successful career. So I think that's the unconscious bias that we still have, that we need to really drive the changes. I cannot stress enough of representation matters. Representation matters a lot. And what image are we showing our next generation is really, really important. And so I talked to my kid about that. And the day after, and I sent an email to the school teacher and said, there's a lot of us trying very, very hard to get more female in the tech, in the workforce, and have a successful career. And in the future, if that would be nice if we can show more diverse image on what a successful and meaningful, fulfilling career can look like. So I think that's something that I am personally very passionate about, and I want to share that.
Thanks, Jennifer. Visual representation is huge, right? The saying, if you can see it, you can be it. And so I think that's very important. Falola and Matthew, you created a nonprofit that tries to invite role models and opportunities. Can you expand more of these gaps in the education and technology systems? How can we get more of these underrepresented students to engage in the tech world?
Okay, so we need to show our underrepresented communities that these high-tech jobs are attainable. It's so important for us to see people who look like us working in these spaces. Our other barriers to tech ecosystems and access to career pathways can include location of services, programs, affordability, lack of confidence due to inexperience for non-tech professionals. So for example, myself, I'm a social worker and my husband's a teacher. But initially when we were trying to get our kids exposed to the tech world in general, it was easy for us to feel like, who are we? Are we qualified enough to introduce our children to robotics or coding? But it wasn't until we started to really dive into, the resources in our community, learn about what is out there, that we understood that we needed to create these bridges, because there are programs that exist that can really support us as parents and really trying to expose our children early. And I think also just to add to that, because representation is so vital, our nonprofit was really intentional about how we do outreach, and how we collaborate with community orgs. And one of the ways that we are creating representation within our nonprofit is by naming our robots. So we have robot characters that we use as hosts for a lot of our programming, and all of them have Pacific Islander names, and they represent different Pacific Islander communities. For example, Matayo is our Samoan robot, and he represents our maker education programming. And we host an event called Matayo's Maker Mondays monthly. So that's just one of the ways that we are trying to show more or increase representation. And I think it's really important for us to really focus on the barriers that can begin early in education, as children begin to develop their identities as learners, supporting positive relationships with STEM subjects like math and science early on will impact their ongoing success in these subjects in the future. So for Pacific Islanders, recent standardized test results reveal that 70% of Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander students in 5th grade have below average understanding of science concepts, and over 73% of 3rd graders have below average skills in mathematics. So we are doing our very best to work with our communities, to work with tech companies to support us in really targeting our communities to find solutions and really support the work.
Yeah,
just to add what.
Sorry, go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah, I just wanted to add real quick to what Lola was sharing about the representation. The data of Pacific Islanders in STEM and tech labor force currently is very minimal. I think it's under 1%. That could have been something that kept us from moving forward with the work we want to do at PIFest as far as representation is concerned. But, sitting on LinkedIn for an hour, I was able to find a lot of Pacific Islanders who are working STEM professions and in tech careers. Right. So our people are out there doing this amazing work. It's just a matter of bringing them to the forefront and showing our community and our children that they too can belong in these spaces.
Yeah, it's hard to break the mold, as you were saying, Falola, if you don't know and have the confidence, right? Tech can be daunting. And then if you don't see folks that work in those fields that look like you, that can be a second ceiling that you have to break through. So I appreciate all that you're doing. You know, we talked about the education and tech system, but government and private industry can come together to better support these opportunities. And we have two government experts here with Portia and Anne. Portia, you want to tackle that question? How can government and private sector come together to create these opportunities?
Sure. I think that what government can do is provide sort of big picture direction. It can provide incentives, it can provide funding, and it can provide data, which is super helpful for us to understand what are the trends and what's happening. But at the end of the day, jobs are local, right? And learning is local. Even if it's online, it's part of a community that you are close to. And I think that's why the work that Matthew and Lola and others are doing to sort of connect people is really important. And I'd say from an industry perspective, Microsoft and Microsoft Philanthropies, we fund a lot of sort of local and smaller nonprofits and partner with them, because that's where people are more likely to walk onto a new path if they have a trusted guide with them. And so that's really the role that nonprofits and intermediaries can provide, especially with something like apprenticeship, where there's a lot of specialized work that goes into setting it up. A large company like Microsoft can afford to set up our own programs. But there are a lot of companies that are much smaller, and most of the jobs in this country come from small and medium-sized businesses. They need tech workers too. Your local pizza parlor now needs to understand technology. And those folks don't even have an HR person. They can't set up their whole own apprenticeship program. So that's why I think government can help with incentives and funding there. Corporations can help by being at the table and saying, these are the jobs we need. These are the skills we need. And then, of course, there's the role of intermediaries and nonprofits and service providers to say, okay, we can help connect everybody and provide some of that glue and some of the supportive services that people need. It's not just giving people the skill, right? People need a way to get there. They need to pay for their gas to get the training. They don't have a device. They don't have broadband. And there are a lot of government supports and services that can help with that too.
I think there's a theme coming through here. What I'm hearing from everyone is really, it is a village of all of us to get to these tech jobs. Anne, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, and Portia is the clear government expert working in policy. I focus on the learning piece of it, but I think government just can't operate as quickly as tech can and as business can, and so we can create these incredible opportunities, and we need government to come in and help us to do the scaffolding and support that Portia talked about. All the other things that need to happen for someone to train and to get a job and to reach underrepresented communities. I think, I grew up in a rural place, and jobs are everywhere, and that thinking isn't spread. If you have an internet connection, you can have a tech job. And who can help us share that message and bring training, anywhere? Well, government can, and our local officials are really key to that, and doing local messaging and local marketing, kind of like Matthew and Flola are doing this, hyper local approach specifically for communities. We do really broad, free, global training, and that's where we can kind of come in and start reaching folks. So I think the other thing is, this new training, this new way to learn, it's rapidly changing. It's smaller chunks. A lot of what government has done is that, okay, here are degree programs and it's 4 years. Well, most people who are upskilling or reskilling can't afford to stop life for 4 years and upskill and reskill. And so we need programs that support these models where maybe it is free, maybe it is, smaller. And how can we kind of together use these micro credentials, as we call them, as building blocks to helping people upskill and reskill to access these jobs. So I do think it's just smaller than these big solutions that we've had around college degrees. And we need to think about ways for people to own their own careers and their own portfolios and to use this technology and some of the more traditional resources as well.
It sounds like that there are definitely in the ecosystem of things, the technology is a company like Salesforce can't do it all. Even though you have a huge budget, you can't do everything, especially the infrastructure stuff that you mentioned and the other portions that make it successful. So thank you for sharing that. There are opportunities, insights, and lessons that each one of you have in regards to diversifying candidates and in the tech world, because we know that there is a need. We've mentioned this before. Pacific Islanders among the Asians are least represented in technology. Matthew and Falola, what are some of your insights into how to create, opportunities for these truly underrepresented folks?
I think one really encouraging insight for us is that when we initially came into the work, we took the lack of participation from Pacific Islander communities as a lack of interest. But as soon as we started hosting in-person events, that was totally, we were proven wrong. Our registrations have hit max capacity that we started having to put people on wait lists. And it was really encouraging for us as parents also to see that, as long as you're breaking down barriers, the participation from our communities will be there. Like they will access it. All of this encouraged us to really seek out programs that exist in the communities and that are serving the communities and bridge that gap between, all the local STEM programs and bringing in our communities to come and learn more about them.
Yeah, like Lola was sharing, I think it's one of the things that we've learned is how critical collaborations and partnerships are to the work that we're trying to do as PIFest. One example of that is this past March 2022, we were able to host our first Pacifica STEM Fair for the Pacific Islander community here in the Bay Area. And we were able to get 31 nonprofit business and corporate sponsors in this first STEM fair that we put on for our community to get involved. So that was really encouraging, and it let us know that building out these relationships and networking with those that have the resources to help us accomplish our mission is going to be very vital to us diversifying and contributing to STEM careers and the tech field as well.
Congratulations on that. Pulling off something the first time is always nervous-wracking, and you question if it's going to succeed. So it sounds like it was a rousing success. As Anne used the term hyper-local. On a larger scale, Jennifer, you guys are now, quote, a mobility tech company. What do you see as one of the largest mobility tech companies in the U.S.? What do you see on that level?
From my vantage point, though, is really building the talent pipeline and also building the confidence level. And because you got to have the skill and you got to have the confidence level and really try the things you haven't tried before. Like you said, the first time doing that is always scary, right? So what we are now doing is really getting down to the teenager level and then the whole pipeline, the whole career path. And one thing that I want to share is we actually have a very much like what Anne was talking about. You have to do more visual these days. And we actually have a virtual field trip that we share with the middle school and high school. So we had multiple different domains in the whole supply chain that we can show them what the life is like working in tech company. So let them see what we do. And the other thing that we also have, though, is this is volunteering, that many of us volunteer to help the middle school, the high school, because Toyota is really, really well known for the Toyota way and the processes, the quality that we have. There are techniques that we have the experiences that we can teach. So we're helping the middle school, the high school, so they can do it and try it, and hearing the encouraging words and kind of help guiding them through the things that they haven't done before and how do we create that critical thinking mindset and the techniques to solve problems, really difficult and complex problem. And recently, a couple months ago, we actually hosted a hackathon that we also partner with UT Dallas, and we have the female student ladies, and they were the one that participate and challenge us as professionals and compete with us as well. And we are also very engaged with the young professionals and then elevated and share our experiences, telling them we are out here, we're here to help and support them when they have issues and struggle as well. For me, though, again, it comes back to representation, right? And the funny thing is, I look at my kids and say, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And all he sees right now is influencer. So that's what they see right now. They want YouTube and TikTok, and that's what I want to be when I grow up. So how do we get more visual in the communities to start sparking new dreams and new inspiring ideas?
Yeah, role modeling is huge, right? What they see, how they consume nowadays is these social media videos and things like that. And if they don't see their people that look like them doing the jobs that we need them to do, that could be a barrier, to your point. Yeah. How does traditional tech companies like Salesforce and Microsoft address these challenges that, Lola, Falola, and Matthew mentioned and Jennifer added? How do you all look at these challenges from a traditional tech companies? And
it's the coolest job I can think of in our space, and it pays very well. We're trying to make it approachable, right? We're an enterprise software and we sell to businesses. And so most kids are not gonna, go learn about this, unless we're really intentional. They know us from our buildings, right? And they know us from our Super Bowl commercials. And then what, right? You get curious about tech and where do you go? We had to make it really approachable. We had to explain what is CRM. We had to explain what is enterprise software. And so we did this about 8 years ago with Trailhead is what it's called. So trailhead.salesforce.com. And you can go on and you start earning badges. And it's fun, it's addicting, it's gamified, and you get points for doing it. And, minute by minute, hour by hour, you start building your knowledge base. You're taking quizzes. There's hands-on challenges where we have an API that's checking the, if you're a reader, you can read and take quizzes. If you're a hands-on learner, you can, really get in there and learn, and accommodating all kinds of learners in an approachable way that allows people to do it while they're waiting in school pickup line, or if they just have an hour after they put the kids to bed. It allows people to, build careers and gain knowledge. And so we have over 1,200 badges, so this content library, and then we do career pathways. And people don't want to just learn to learn. Everybody's busy. So we want to say, here are the career pathways, here are the jobs, here's what they make, here's a success story of someone. Really, that representation you all were talking about, the role of parents and the role of role models, and also showing people who didn't have an Ivy League computer science degree and now makes, $87,000 as a Salesforce administrator. We tell those stories of the distance traveled and the journeys to really make it approachable for people. So I think we're trying, people get in there, we keep adding new content, we keep building new technology. I think what's so exciting is as we add new technology and get into exciting spaces like, the net zero challenge, and we're working on, green technology, people can come in and start learning and they can build their baseline. And then it does create that access for career opportunities, general upskilling, and eventually dream jobs.
I'm going to jump on Trailhead. It sounds really exciting. I'm going to probably learn a ton of things, and definitely maybe incentivize my kids to learn more about, the digital world. So thank you for sharing, Anne. Portia?
I just want to second what Anne said. It does sound fun. Actually, we've got our own offerings at Microsoft too, but we're also lucky that we have Xbox. So like thinking about gaming and other ways, you have to meet people where they are. Things need to seem fun. They need to seem relevant. And also I think a muscle we're trying to flex more and more at Microsoft is, like I said earlier, going to those more unusual places, not just 4-year degrees, because frankly, those are the places where you have a much more diverse pipeline of talent, especially with the cost of higher education these days. It's just siphoning off a lot of people. It'll be completely inaccessible. So that's why community colleges apprenticeship programs where you can learn and earn, so you don't have to give up your job just to get skills, or you have another way to support your family while you're doing that. And for a lot of transitioning veterans, we've been doing programs before they exit the military, so that way people can hit the ground running with a good paying job and other opportunities. So that's a lot of what we've been focused on.
And it reminds me of the saying that if you're doing the same thing and expecting different results, the people call that dumb or something like that, I guess. But we have to look outside of the box, to your point, Portia, right? Non-traditional, non-4-year degree veterans, people who got out of the system some way or somehow, to bring them back into the technology that we need them to have and the skills that we need them to have. So that's a great point. We're closing up on our wrap up here, and we're great on time, but before we wrap up, I'd love to hear last thoughts from you about this bigger challenge of, what would you like the audience to leave with? So we'll start with Matthew and Philola. What would you like the audience to learn?
First of all, before we close, APAICS, thank you again for giving us the platform to share about PIFest and the work that we're doing. And also thank you, Con, for facilitating the discussion. We're honored to be on this panel and share space with individuals like Jennifer, Portia, and Ann, who are trying to create pathways for communities that are underrepresented in tech. So thank you. We're very grateful. I think if there's one thing that I'd like for folks to know is that, we need your help, I guess, is what I'd like to say in the form of, supporting with resources or just getting folks involved in the work that we're doing, and trying to expose young children to STEM learning and the tech field early on in their life. So if it is, I'll just leave it. You can contact us on those avenues.
And just to add, I think with all of the exciting new ways that communities can get involved with tech pathways, I think that if there's one message I would like to share is that for parents like us who don't have tech backgrounds, that it's important not to be intimidated by all of the resources, because sometimes when you dive in and really try and search for programs that you want your children or you think your children will be interested in, not to get overwhelmed by everything that is out there and then not to be discouraged by programs that have high costs, like summer programs or that might cost a lot or seem like they would cost a lot, because there are ways to be able to finance or support you. And I think that's where we come in as far as sharing and making sure our communities know about all of the resources that exist in our community. So not to give up.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great message, is not to give up. It's kind of interesting. Both my wife and I are tech folks, and my son doesn't want to go in tech. So maybe not having a tech degree your kids will rebel and want to go in tech, right? It's the reverse psychology. But I think that's a great point, that we should approach technology with some confidence because we use it all the time, and not let that be a barrier. And Matthew, I'm going to reach out to you. So you're going to get a reach out from me as somebody who runs, one of the largest Asian American career fairs for STEM. We're going to definitely talk. So thank you.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we'll definitely connect afterwards. Jennifer, your parting thoughts?
Again, thank you so much for the opportunity to allow us to have a platform to share our story and our experiences with everyone. Again, thank you. My departing thoughts is really, it takes a whole village, like you said, Con, and be able to drive the changes. It's going to take all of us to get our hands in and lean in and help and elevate all of us, right? And really use our voice and show up and share our story. I think sometimes it's also share our struggles, because otherwise a lot of the lesson learned, the bigger the problem I had, the bigger the lesson I learned. and it's helpful to share those struggles that we have, and really to build up the confidence and use our voice to help them and help everyone around us in the community. And again, it really comes back to what are we going to do to drive the changes. My dream really is the next generation not only want to be an influencer, but to be the innovator influencer. I think that will be a very, very cool thing to see if we can drive that changes.
You mentioned authenticity. I think that's important. Some of the stories that Matthew and Falola shared, being very authentic, right? And that's the young folks really want us to be authentic, but then really not only own the skill sets, but to your point, be the change agent, be the innovators of the next century. Because, the statistics I keep reading is that the jobs in 20 years, they don't exist now. So they need to create those jobs. So thank you, Jennifer, for sharing. And Anne, your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks. I think that, this panel represents it, but this is an all hands on deck approach of all companies, government, nonprofits, parents. We are all working together to really help solve this issue. It's critical business issues. It's designing the next technology innovations, and it's solving talent gaps. And so we just need to be bold. We need to be innovative and try new things to really solve. And so I think from the organization level, let's all just continue to partner and share best practices just like this. And then from the individual level, I'd grab a soapbox and grab a megaphone and just scream that everyone belongs in tech. You do not have to have a technical background. You do not have to have a traditional background. You are welcome and you are needed in tech. So I love that, your son knows that it's available to him and right now doesn't want to. It'll be interesting to see where his career goes, but everyone knowing that it's an option for them and that it's an opportunity, and there's so many ways to get in, I think is just an imperative right now.
Yeah, thank you for the rallying cry. We need that because the challenge is grand, and we need, as to your point, all hands on deck right now. So I appreciate the message, and I appreciate challenging our audience to think how they can be part of the solution. Portia, you got the last word.
Well, I was going to say something like what Ann did, which is basically come on in, the water's warm, right? And also technology is in the image in which we create it. If we don't have a diverse set of people at the table, our technology tools will not be diverse and will not serve all people in all communities. And so that's why it's so important. But as Ann said, they're all types, it takes all types. Bill Gates didn't finish college. Lots of the biggest tech companies in this country were founded by people who didn't finish college. People shouldn't think that's a barrier. They shouldn't worry that it's too late. So if your mom, your grandma, whoever wants to come on in, we're open and we'd love to talk.
It's definitely a welcoming door. Thank you very much, Portia. Again, it's been a pleasure being on the panel with everyone. Thank you to Portia, Jennifer, and Matthew and Falola for sharing your thoughts and your experience and really putting an emphasis on how big this challenge is, and that we all are part of the small cogs that need to come together to make this solution work, right? I definitely want to acknowledge and thank you, APAICS, for hosting this tech summit on the diversity career pathways into the tech field. And, enjoy the rest of the conference and feel free to reach out to any of us. As Matthew mentioned, we'd love to talk to you. So again, thank you, APAICS. Thank you, Madeline. Thank you, Representative Chu. And thank you to our panelists for a great time. And hopefully you've learned something. With that, we'll sign off. Thank you.
Welcome back to the 2022 APAICS Tech Summit and our last panel of the day, Ethical Frameworks for Technology. This session will explore how we can advance technology while ensuring that it is still used in ways that respect civil rights, preserve privacy, ensure transparency, and hold both governments and companies accountable. Moderating this discussion is Shreya Singh Hernandez. Shreya, who's also an APAICS alumna, is a data and tech equity subject matter expert focused on social impact. She is currently working at the Aspen Institute as Aspen Digital's Tech Equity Research Manager on the Tech Equity Accountability Mechanism, otherwise known as TEAM. In this role, she works at the intersection of tech, policy, and justice for underrepresented communities. TEAM partners with leaders and academics in the digital technology sector to standardize diversity, equity, and inclusion data collection, and provides expert support from diversifying pathways in tech employment to product impact to hold the tech industry as a whole accountable. Welcome back to APAICS, Shreya.
Thank you so much, Madeline. It is my honor to be moderating today's panel on tech equity and ethical frameworks. It is also my pleasure to be in community with our brilliant panelists today. Today, we will be hearing from the following panelists. Arnab Chakraborty is Accenture's North America Applied Intelligence Lead, where he plays a key role in driving collaboration with AI startups and ecosystem partners, along with academic and research institutions to bring AI-led innovation to clients. Arnab is also on the advisory board of UC Berkeley's Institute of Data Science and Stanford Institute of Computational Math and Engineering. Emily Chi is the Director of Telecommunications, Technology, and Media at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, or AAJC, where she is responsible for developing and providing public policy, research, strategies, analysis, and education on telecommunications, technology, and media diversity. Daniel Kelly is the Director of Strategy and Operations at the Anti-Defamation League, or ADL, Center for Technology and Society, CTS. CTS works through research and advocacy to fight for justice and fair treatment for all in digital social spaces, from social media to online games and beyond. Daniel leads the center's work to fight hate and harassment in the games. To kick off our conversation today, I'd love to ask our panelists a question about how does your organization think about ethical frameworks for new and emerging technologies, and what are the opportunities you have identified? At the Aspen Institute, we're looking at a digital equity accelerator to issues of privacy, internet governance, and algorithm accountability, to national security issues and how they intersect with artificial intelligence. I'd love to open this question up to any of our panelists to talk about how their organizations think about ethical frameworks for new and emerging technologies.
Yeah, I can pick it up here. Great to be in this panel with all of you. Just to give you some background, at Accenture, especially with AI, we are seeing this as a huge alpha trend, in terms of how it's going to transform businesses and communities that we live in. And, I'm personally working with a number of CEOs and C-suites in, helping them how AI can transform their organizations. We are working on interesting topics like, creating, treatments for cancer, using the power of AI and algorithms. We are working on wildfire mitigation strategies, for utility companies, using machine vision. We're working on, areas like human trafficking and how to mitigate the risks of human trafficking, using the power of data analytics and AI. So huge opportunities, across the spectrum from business to social impact. Having said that, a big challenge that organizations face in this journey is around adoption. And that is centering around trust and integrity of the AI solutions. The latest research that we published around our tech research, tech vision, we call it, it actually pointed out that 65% of the consumers actually don't trust the AI solutions. And that to me indicates that we as the leadership, in this community have to take a very active role in creating responsible AI solutions, that go into the organizations and impacts our community. And as I look at that, there is a lot of regulations that are coming in, both in Europe as well as in US and North America. And when we did a pretty pioneering research with MIT around the whole AI maturity that is happening across the globe, and more importantly in the United States. And what we found that 97% of the leaders are aware of the regulations that are coming, but 6% of them believe that their organizations are ready, for taking care of the ongoing changes that are happening around AI regulation. And to me, that indicates that there are few things that organizations need to pay attention, when it comes to, doing AI in a responsible manner. Number one, it starts with principles and making sure that you have the right governance, clearly articulated around responsible AI. Very, very important, so that it's well understood across the organization. The second thing that is very important around that is to have the right policies and controls for risk mitigation, risk management across the entire data and AI value chain, if you will, right from the data to the algorithms to the insight creation and to the decision making. And then finally, it boils down to what kind of technology enablers we have put in place to ensure fairness, explainability of the algorithms, so that we can take care of the biases that can come in either in the data or the algorithm and helps drive better accountability. And finally, it boils down to the talent. How do we make sure that we are having the right talent and the culture inbuilt who can speak the same language, understand how responsible AI can be actioned upon in their roles and within their organization and their teams. So those are, some of the areas that we are working on to really help organizations scale AI, but do that with confidence and do that by building trust in their entire ecosystem.
Yes, thank you so much, Arnav. I really appreciate your answer here and to hear more about the work that you're doing at Accenture. I would love to also ask our second question, which is, what are some of the challenges our panelists have seen in terms of managing/mitigating bias, harassment, and surveillance? I would love to pose this to Emily and Daniel to ask about your experiences.
Sure. Thank you so much, Shreya, and thank you so much to APAICS for arranging this panel to talk about how all these issues are affecting our community today. So I'm Emily Chi. I use she, her pronouns, and we're really at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC, are trying to think about these issues specifically from an Asian American community lens. So some of the things that we're looking at, first of all, I just want to say all the issues that we're seeing with tech, with bias, surveillance, harassment, none of these issues are new, right? If you look at history, these are issues that have always existed in our society. So the tech edition is just amplifying what was already existing and has continued and perpetuated throughout our history. So for example, when we think about discrimination against Asian Americans, the same way in real life you might discriminate against an Asian American sounding last name maybe, or someone who attended an Asian university, our algorithms that we're building to process those more quickly are using the same discriminatory biases that people already have, right? The machines aren't changing anything. They're informed and built by people who are biased. So of course the outcomes are going to be biased if we don't have corrective measures in them. So we always want to think about, how do we understand the community, their history, their interactions with the world, the way they have or do not have power and resources, instead of just jumping to the tech platform product features and thinking of it just as a technical issue. So really, people first, people centered is the first issue we see where it's not being done, and that's why we see a lot of misunderstanding and exclusion of our communities. Second, I'd say documentation of the issues and even, what the data looks like is already biased and discriminatory, right? Because that's also embedded in history, right? Even looking back at the census throughout history or other studies about health outcomes, about access to digital connections, all of these, it matters who is collecting, who they consider to be important and worth collecting data on, and who they know, right? So when we think about who in our population often gets erased by some of the mainstream studies, it's non-English speakers, because surveys and other studies often aren't conducted in other languages. Folks who may be differently documented, who are afraid to speak up or participate in such activities because because they know they're at risk of being known. So, their data really isn't there because they're not willing to give it. But that essentially is erasing them from our analysis, even though they're one of the most vulnerable communities that we should be extra mindful of when we're designing and thinking about new products. So really we need to think like, who has even the power and access to show up in the data, right? Like who collected it and who is sometimes intentionally missing, and how do we reinsert those voices and those metrics when they are vulnerable and fearful and have reason not to trust these institutions, right? So it's cultural, it's relationship building, it's trust building, but also understanding the past and the context they're living in today. I'll also add that when we do win fights for greater privacy and digital rights, one of the challenges is that unfortunately, in our country, even with digital rights, it is an exercise. It's only exercisable by the most privileged, the most educated, people with the greatest resources and time to even understand and go through, those cookie banners and the privacy policies to opt out. It requires a great amount of resources and privileges. So our challenge is, even if we pass privacy legislation, how do we make sure it's accessible and exercisable by the most vulnerable communities with the least digital literacy, with the least education, with the least language access, right? So that's a challenge. And then the other thing I'll mention that I just need to re-highlight is our communities are so diverse. With every wave of immigration, every new country of origin, every new conflict that pushes refugees here, all the different languages that are spoken, all our different histories, we've been at war with each other for thousands of years sometimes in the motherland, and then we come here and we're all in the same group. We don't have the same understanding of history. We didn't all have the same Asian American experience. So it's really important to remember we're not a monolith and we're talking data. We really make sure we're inclusive and meaningfully representing the communities to make sure we are reducing harm against them and maximizing the potential good that we can do for them.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily. That was such a wonderful and insightful intersectional analysis and really took a look at the structures of power in play here. I'd love to hand it over to Daniel to talk a little bit about his work and his view of the challenges in managing and mitigating harm, bias, harassment in surveillance.
Sure. Thank you. And thanks for having me on this panel. I'm in total agreement with everything that Emily is saying. I'm going to speak a little bit from our perspective at the Anti-Defamation League. Our mission is to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment for all. And at the Center for Technology and Society, where I work, we're really focused on the second part of that mission and focused on that in digital spaces, focusing on social media, focusing on online games, and sort of the two areas where we really focus and where we see there being two platform-wide problems, right? When you're thinking at the platform level, is we don't know how much hate there is anywhere on any platform. And we don't know whether anything any platform is doing at all is working, right? These seem like pretty fundamental concepts, right? To know how much of a thing is happening on your social platform and whether the things that you're doing to try to mitigate that harm are working. You might imagine that in the year 2022, having been through what the U.S. has been through, what other countries have been through, what social media has been through in terms of the sort of lack of faith that the public has in their ability to mitigate these problems, you think that we'd have a better handle on these kinds of issues, but we really don't. And so I think those are really, in terms of the amount, I think one of the things that we recommend and that we are pushing platforms to do, in terms of hate on any platform, you have platforms, social media companies that provide transparency reporting that is very, they sort of cherry pick the metrics. They don't, they change everything from quarter to quarter. We don't have a sense of whether, the data that they're providing us is accurate. And especially when we're talking about hate and harassment against vulnerable and marginalized communities, we don't have a sense, for example, how much hate against Asian Americans is there on Facebook, right? How much anti-Semitism is there on Twitter? Right? We don't have a sense of the experience of different communities on different platforms because the experience of hate as experienced by different communities is different, right? And so I think one of the things we talk about is that the platforms don't have their arms around centering the different communities and the ways that they're impacted by hate on their platforms. And that's one of the things we're pushing for in the work that we do. In terms of the efforts that the companies are making, again, we see high-minded, big. I think we see that less recently, but definitely in the past, we've seen sort of high, profile announcements from various companies about the actions that they're taking around extremism or hate or anti-Asian hate or anti-Semitism. And I think a lot of these times these things happen at the policy level, right? They happen at the level of the rules that are put in place in terms of how a platform is governed. But then when you actually look at and test whether the platform is enforcing these stated policies, I think you end up seeing huge gaps in the ways in which these things are enforced. And I think that goes back to what Emily was saying in terms of whose perspective is being included in the enforcement and in the interpretation of the policies. Are the perspectives of vulnerable and marginalized and targeted communities being centered in how the idea of hate is being interpreted in the policymaking, in the enforcement, in content moderation decisions. So I think those are some of the sort of the big picture challenges that we see, and I'm certainly happy to get into some of the solutions, such as they are, right, in what follows. But that's sort of what I'll highlight at a high level.
Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel. What really resonated with me was your point on the lack of unified systems or standards around addressing hate online across platforms, and the difference between the way different communities experience, and as Emily mentioned, even within the AAPI community, different sections of our community experience hate online. So thank you so much for that. And you've teed us up perfectly for our next question, which is, what are some solutions to the challenges we've just identified from your perspective? And how do we make sure that vulnerable communities do not bear the brunt of harms applied by new technologies? I'd love to open it up to our panelists here.
Yeah, no, Shreya, that's a great question. I am happy to pick it up here. I think I really love the comments made by Emily and Daniel, around the challenges. And as we look at, organizations, I think this is a huge responsibility for organizations that are bringing, AI-powered solutions to make sure that they are fair and, they are creating equitable decisions, right, for all cross sections of our society. I think it boils down to those 4 pillars that I mentioned, but our ability to, assess the maturity around the pillars, right? Whether it's, we talked about the principles and governance, having a clear articulation of what is our, in the case of AI, what is our responsible AI principles? What are the definitions of it? And how does it align with my overall corporate strategy is extremely, extremely critical. But then not just keep it at the assessment and definition phase, but then crystallize that with leadership action by evangelizing that and, kind of orchestrating that across the entire enterprise from the top leadership, saying this is what responsible AI means for us and how it is a strategic imperative for the future of our company, for our customers, for our entire ecosystem of value chain partners. And then figuring out a way to constantly measure the company's strategy and its evolution with respect to use responsible AI principles. And then taking it one step further, and institutionalizing that into the policies and the controls that are being put in place to assess the gaps, with respect to the point that Danielle was making about platforms, right? What are some of the gaps with respect to the controls and the policies, that are in place? Can we start creating, more automation or semi-automation with human in the loop to start monitoring on a regular basis, with respect to our compliance against those, protocols, right? And if we are seeing some aberrations, right, how can we actually intervene in between to make adaptations both ways for the platform, tech platform, but also for the policies which might need to get adapted, and how can we establish a feedback loop in between, right, with all those learnings? I think is going to become extremely critical. And then the element that I want to highlight is around the bias, the bias that starts coming in, and how can we start creating a robust technology-enabled approach in assessing the fairness, that both in the data that is coming in, and something that Emily talked about, there is a lot of historic bias that can come in the data, and that can perpetuate into the AI models that are making the decisions. how do you actually find a mechanism of clubbing that at the beginning itself, so that you don't perpetuate the AI models? And at the same time, as your AI models are being built, how do you have a framework in ongoing monitoring of the AI models, the performance of the models? If there is decaying and drift in the AI models, how can you actually measure that and again do proactive interventions to correct that? That becomes extremely critical. And just to give you an example, many times we actually do a lot of data sanitization. For example, we want to prevent gender bias, so we have taken out variables that are related to gender. But unknowingly, there might be data that is there around employment history. And sometimes we know that these are proxy attributes that can start creating inherent biases around gender disequality, if you will, right? How can you start identifying those proxy variables and take into account from your data quality perspective? So just wanted to share that example. And then finally, it's about the talent and the skills, right? How can we assess the readiness of our talent with respect to understanding responsible AI? And how can we actually create new skilling programs for the talent within our organization across our ecosystem, so their overall AI acumen can actually improve and they can speak the same language? And just to bring it to life, I've taken an example from a financial services banking industry. We worked with one of the large European banks, and they were creating digital solutions to drive personalization at scale for their customers. And we had the opportunity of partnering with them to define their entire AI principles for their personalization digital agenda, and then translating that back to the understanding the algorithmic biases that might be coming in, and how to measure that, how to establish the right parameters, the thresholds, and more importantly, as we establish those algorithmic biases, principles, and models, it started creating more explainability and more transparency around their AI models, and that helped them to also answer a lot of the questions with the regulators. And now they're taking that approach, obviously creating more trust-based, fair decisions with their end customers, creating better customer experiences, but now taking it into other dimensions like anti-money laundering, KYC, fraud management. The similar principles are being taken across the entire value chain of the banking sector in the case of the banking client in the Europe. So just wanted to bring that to life and share some of the solution principles and how that can really help us create scaled AI solutions and scaled AI impact.
Yeah, thank you so much, Arnav. I really, I was taking notes during your response, and I really pulled out elements of the policy and leadership buy-in in ecosystem that is necessary to make AI fairness a reality. Also, measurement and evaluation and intervention, creating systems to be able to put that into action as part of regular processes. And then finally, debiasing, not only from the point of the creation and the implementation of algorithms, but also from staffing, something that is very central to the program that I'm currently working on, the Tech Equity Accountability Mechanism, is how do we make sure that we're creating pipelines, or should I say pathways of staff that are not only taking just standard 101 DEI trainings, but actually looking deeply into what product inclusion looks like, and creating systems and processes to ensure that our practitioners, our tech workers are informed about bias and ethics and ways to include that in their work to create more equitable products as a result. I'd love to hand this over to Daniel to talk a little bit of the work at the ADL.
Sure. So in terms of the solutions that we're looking at, I think one of the so we have sort of a 6-part sort of framework for addressing hate on the internet, which we call our repair framework. I'll spare you the acronym for now, but I'll focus on sort of 2 elements for now, which is one of them, the E in repair, is for exposing platform recklessness, and the A is advocate for targets of online hate and harassment. So when we're talking about exposing platform recklessness, we're talking really here about transparency, and when we're talking about advocating for targets of online hate and harassment, we're talking about making sure that we are raising up the voices of those communities that are most impacted. And so we do this in a couple different ways. One of the ways we do this is we do 2 nationally representative surveys, which look at one of the problems that I raised earlier, which is around, how much hate is there online? So we do a survey of social media, and we do a survey of online multiplayer games, looking at both as digital social spaces where hate and harassment manifest. This past year, we found that 47% of adults were experienced any form of online harassment in social media spaces. 25% experienced severe harassment. So that's physical threats, sustained harassment, stalking, sexual harassment, those kinds of things. When we're talking about online multiplayer games, they're about 10 years behind social media in terms of the ways in which they're addressing the content. So in the past year, it's gone up year over year since we started this in 2019, but 83% of adults experienced harassment in online multiplayer games, and 71% experienced severe harassment of the types that I mentioned before, right? And so I think this is sort of one way in which we look at and trying to get our arms around, how big is this problem? Is anything that the companies, are the steps that the companies taking, making a big difference in terms of the numbers we're seeing, in terms of people who are experiencing this and the ways in which they are expressing themselves through this. A survey has limits, as Emily mentioned, but I think this is sort of a way to start getting our arms around the kinds of harms that are happening in these spaces. Another way in which we are looking at this sort of issue is by doing and looking at the development of AI and machine learning tools with the targeted communities sort of at the center of that. So I think it was last year there was a huge leak of Facebook documents by the whistleblower Frances Haugen, and in one of the quotes they mentioned, they talk about how they train machine learning models, right? Essentially, they take a whole bunch of data and they have a bunch of people online code them as hate or not hate. Right, and the quote from the leak was essentially, "Is not doing, it's never going to make much of a dent," is what this says, right? And so what we've been doing over the last year is really looking at, okay, how do we create a machine learning model that centers the experience of targeted communities? So we have been developing a machine learning model that takes, that focuses on anti-Semitism, right? And that is about Jewish people taking the experience of anti-Semitism that they see online and labeling the data as either anti-Semitism or not, based on their experience, and then using that data to feed the classifier and train it, right? This is a model that we think could be used by other impacted communities as well. And so it's a start of a process whereby we're saying, okay, what does it actually mean to put the targeted communities in the center of creating these technologies? Not just, when you hear a lot of talk about content moderation and the need to have people with different sort of language and cultural backgrounds reviewing the content once it's flagged. But I think another piece of this is really centering those communities in the creation of the technology as well. So those are the kind of things that I would highlight in terms of some solutions that we're exploring. And I will turn it back to you. I'm happy to talk more about any of this.
Yeah, thank you so much. And wow, those numbers were a lot. I was not expecting them to be that high. You said, 47% of adults, that's almost half of our online population on social media experiences harm. And, I can't imagine, the 83% that you mentioned on multiplayer games, that is, that's a significant part of the culture. And wow, thank you so much for sharing that. And definitely resonating strongly with the idea of making sure that communities are at the center of the technologies that they engage with and that affect them. I want to hand it over to Emily to talk about her work as well.
Sure. Thank you, Shreya. And thank you to my co-panelists. I'm sure I'm going to echo a lot of what you've already said. But from AJC's perspective, again, we're speaking from Asian American populations and communities and all of our diverse communities. So when we are working with companies, it is a lot of what Daniel has already mentioned. We want to make sure that it is community focused, user focused, people centered, and we're thinking about the needs, challenges, and potential harms that could be brought on marginalized communities from the very beginning of ideation and product creation. At every single step of a company's process, it should be embedded rather than layered on top as like a afterthought or like regulatory enforcement thing that happens retroactively. We really need that value of like the humanness and the effect it will have on society to be front and center at every stage. And I'll add that it's not just user research, right? Like we are seeing some progress, which is really encouraging, where there is this awareness, okay, users have to be diverse, they have to be from different walks and of life and different community backgrounds to make sure we're designing for a broader audience. And that's kind of easy because that's in a company's interest too, right? Because they're increasing their market of users. But it's really important that they also think about how their products and features are affecting non-users and society at large, because even though they might not be direct customers or clients, they are inevitably harmed, or their lives are just changed neutrally or whatever it is, maybe for better even, by the technology, regardless of whether or not they are engaging in it directly. So surveillance is a great and privacy is a great example of this. Now, because we live in a world where everyone has cameras and mics on them all the time, I might not engage in an application that I know isn't great on privacy. But if someone in my household does use that application and shares information about themselves, my data is inevitably now tied in, even if I'm not engaged, right? My family members who don't speak English, their data is included, even though they have no idea what this app is or what it does or what it collects about them. So really, who is in the entire ecosystem, even if they're not engaging directly with you? It's really important to understand, at this point, and looking historically, what is the lived experience of these communities? What type of forces have pushed them in certain ways? How do we minimize the harms that are going to be perpetuated inevitably, right? Because these tech companies are embedded in society. It's not 100% their fault either, but they need to understand the world they're entering and the effect that they will have, because they are responsible for how they either reduce that harm or increase it. And in many of these instances, unfortunately, we've seen they are increasing the societal harms and amplifying it. So how do we do this? Number one, this was already brought up, and I'm glad to hear Accenture is thinking about this already, but hiring diverse workers who come from different communities and are able to bring their lived experiences, their communities, their families with them when they walk into the door, right? They're hired because they bring value, not because of just their technical skills, but because of the lived experiences and communities they bring in with them. So we should be more inclusive from who we hire at every single level, every layer, every team of the company, because each and every team has some kind of decision making that will impact the community, and there has to be some community representation there. I'll also add that, we know it's not possible to have the perfect group of people from every community. So education and training is essential. So all teams at all levels and disciplines should all have to be required to understand the societies, the countries, the markets, the individual communities and users that they're going to be interacting with, and understand how their day-to-day is going to impact the lived experiences of real people on the ground. And that needs to be constantly iterative for every new issue, every new controversy that comes up. That they're going to have a hand in impacting. And then I'll also add data disaggregation and contextualization of the data is really important. So whenever we're using data to inform the decisions that are going to be made by machines, for example, who collected that data, when was it collected by, for what purpose, and what was it used for? And also, I think we have to talk about, it should be people-centered, it should be community-focused, but also when is it just not appropriate to include our community members and their data in the products we're making, because it's not going to be a positive thing for them, right? At what point do we say, we should refrain from collecting as much data we should have and only collect what is absolutely necessary to actually provide this service? Because we know that it's not always in our interest to have all of our data included in these systems, especially if there isn't as much transparency, and especially if our communities are vulnerable and that data can be weaponized against them. So always making sure that it actually serves our communities to be included and stopping when it's not appropriate. And then the last thing I'll say is, we already talked about this with our different panelists, but the importance of transparency and accountability. So it's not enough to have one DEI initiative. It's not enough to have one privacy opt-out tool. This really has to be an iterative process where there's accountability, right? We understand the impact of your interventions. We understand the impact of your DEI initiatives, increasing diversity, and constantly go back to it in consultation with community to constantly understand how the decisions tech companies are making are impacting our communities. And it has to be an open pipeline of communication that's constant and built in with accountability so that we know that they actually are listening and making the changes that our communities are demanding.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily. You've definitely given me a lot to think about. I've been taking notes as well. And I've had the honor of seeing you in action and seeing you, put forth these recommendations in place. And just one thing that I wrote down was we have to start thinking about how products and features are affecting non-users and truly thinking about the negative externalities of these products and their impacts on people that they may not even be thinking about in the ecosystem. That is so important. I think I really want to wrap it up and mention an example from my own experience. As was mentioned earlier, I am currently at the Aspen Institute at Aspen Digital Policy Program of the Aspen Institute, working on a team called the Tech Equity Accountability Mechanism, or TEAM, where we are looking at creating systems of accountability for the tech industry at large, from people to pathways to tech companies and tech roles, especially in these hard, software engineering and AI positions, to belonging and making sure that is a space where people feel welcome, to product inclusion and ensuring that while we're working on this long-term challenge of staff representation and making sure tech workers are representative of all societies that they belong to, that we're also creating systems and processes and checks for products to go through to ensure that they are equitable in their impact. I wanted to bring up, because we are a convener and it is my honor to bring together people, much like Emily in previous conversations, somebody who I had the honor of engaging with earlier, who provides an opportunity in this space, and that is Michael Runningwolf. He is a software engineer and runs a coding camp for Indigenous youth, and really is doing amazing work in making sure that artificial intelligence is used to increase the preservation of Native and Indigenous languages. And I wanted to close out this conversation with a mention of his work, because it really provides an opportunity to look at where AI can go in the preservation of our cultures and in serving our communities in a really authentic way, driven by people from the community, and creating those pipelines and strengthening those. So I just wanted to bring his name in this space, and also thank all of our wonderful panelists here gathered today. I've definitely been taking copious notes, and this has been such an inspiring and eye-opening panel. I hope all of the watchers of this panel feel the same. And I just wanted to give a big thank you for my invitation and for the company that you have been providing. Thank you to APAICS and all to the organizers of this event.
Thank you.
And thank you, Shreya, for facilitating a great conversation. I certainly learned a lot as well.
What a wonderful first day we've had here at the 2022 APAICS Tech Summit. Tomorrow, we will have even more important and timely discussions, including measuring your ERG impact, learn about how employee resource groups, otherwise known as ERGs, and related initiatives can contribute to positive outcomes for companies, employees, and their communities. How technology affects social change. In this session, experts will explore the effects of technology on society and how it can be used to raise awareness and foster tangible change. And exploring how fintech is driving financial inclusion. This discussion will convene leaders in the financial services community to explore how fintech can be used to drive social equity as it relates to financial inclusion. And we also have a fireside chat with United States Trade Representative Ambassador Catherine Tai. You will not want to miss out, so see you back here tomorrow.